The dawn came cold and gray over the Colorado Rockies, the kind of morning that reminded a man winter never truly forgives. Jack McCallister woke at 0500 hours, same as he had every day for the past 40 years. Old habits die harder than old soldiers, and at 62, Jack was living proof of both truths. His cabin sat 15 miles from Black Ridge Outpost, buried deep in pine forests, where the only sounds were wind through branches and the occasional crack of ice settling on the roof. He'd chosen this place deliberately. Isolation wasn't loneliness when you'd spent 4 decades surrounded by men who died young and memories that refused to fade. The bedroom was sparse, a single bed with military corners, a nightstand holding a lamp and a flip phone. No smartphone, no computer, no connection to a world that had moved on without asking his permission. On the wall, a single framed photograph. His wedding day, 1985. Elizabeth smiling in white lace while he stood rigid in dress blues. She'd been gone 5 years now. Cancer had taken her slowly, unlike the sudden violence that had claimed so many others he'd loved. Jack sat up, joints protesting. 62 wasn't old by civilian standards, but 40 years as a Navy SEAL left marks that no amount of physical therapy could erase. His knees ached from 100 parachute jumps. His back carried shrapnel fragments from Mogadishu. His hands, scarred and calloused, had held more rifles than most men had held conversations. He dressed in silence. Thermal underwear, flannel shirt, work jeans, wool socks. The routine was meditation. Each movement precise, practiced, necessary. Downstairs, he made coffee in a percolator because Mr. Coffee machines were for people who'd forgotten what real coffee tasted like. Black, no sugar. The first sip burned his tongue the way coffee should. The living room held what remained of his life, a worn leather chair facing a stone fireplace, bookshelves lined with military history and Tom Clancy novels from before Clancy got soft, and the mantle, the shrine, the reason he woke up every morning and wondered if today would be the day he finally found peace. 3 photographs dominated the mantle. The first showed a young Marine lieutenant in dress blues, Lieutenant James McCallister, USMC, his firstborn son. KIA Fallujah, 2004, 26 years old. Jack had buried him on a Tuesday that felt like the end of the world. The second photograph was more recent. Staff Sergeant Michael McCallister, USMC, grinning beside a Humvee somewhere in the Middle East. His younger son, still alive, still deployed, still sending emails that Jack rarely answered, because what could a father say to a son following in footsteps that led to graves? The third photograph was oldest and largest. Afghanistan, February 1989. 10 men in winter warfare gear, standing in snow with mountains behind them. Young faces, hard smiles, the confidence of warriors who believed they were invincible. Jack stood in the center, 32 years old, hair still black, face unlined, eyes clear. Master Chief Petty Officer. SEAL Team 3, the best of the best. 8 of those faces were circled in red marker. 8 men who never came home. Jack stared at the photograph like he did every morning, forcing himself to remember their names, their voices, their final moments. Lieutenant David Chen, Chief Petty Officer Tommy Martinez, Petty Officer First Class Rodriguez, Petty Officer Second Class Williams, and 4 others whose families still sent him Christmas cards he never answered because what could you say to a mother whose son died because you missed your shot by 2 inches? 2 inches. At 3,540 meters, in a snowstorm with wind gusting to 35 knots, 2 inches seemed impossibly small. But those 2 inches had meant the difference between a kill shot and a shoulder wound, between mission success and catastrophic failure, between 10 men walking off that mountain and only 2 coming home alive. Jack turned away from the photographs and walked to the gun cabinet. Solid oak, locked, containing a lifetime of precision instruments. He opened it with a key he wore on a chain around his neck. Inside, rifles stood in perfect order. An M40A3 from his early sniper days, a MK11 from Iraq, a Barrett M82 that weighed as much as a small child and could punch through engine blocks. And in the center, his newest acquisition, a Shaytac M200 intervention chambered in 408 Shaytac, matte black, carbon fiber stock, computer-grade machining, the most accurate long-range rifle system ever built. He'd bought it with retirement money, telling himself it was for hunting elk. But elk didn't require a rifle capable of reaching out past 2 miles. Elk didn't require a man to lie in the snow, calculating Coriolis effect in spindrift. He lifted the Chaytak from its rack, feeling its weight settle into his hands like an extension of his own body. Muscle memory from 10,000 repetitions. His fingers found the familiar contours without thought. Bolt handle, trigger guard, magazine well, safety selector. Each component mapped into neural pathways carved deeper than conscious thought. Outside, snow was falling again. Heavy, wet flakes that would accumulate fast. Jack set the rifle on the kitchen table and began his morning workout. 100 push-ups. Used to do them without breaking stride. Now he struggled past 70, arms shaking, old injuries flaring. But he finished. Always finished. Because finishing was what separated the living from the dead. He was halfway through sit-ups when the phone rang. Jack ignored it. The only people who had this number were people he didn't want to talk to. It rang 6 times, then stopped. Silence returned. He continued his workout. The phone rang again. Jack paused mid-sit-up, sweat cooling on his skin. Whoever was calling wasn't giving up. He crossed to the phone, an old rotary model mounted on the wall, and lifted the receiver. A voice he recognized immediately came through the line. Colonel Robert Harrison, callsign Hawk, commander of Black Ridge Outpost. And 25 years ago, a young lieutenant whom Jack had trained in desert warfare during Operation Desert Storm. The voice was tight, controlled. But underneath, Jack heard something he'd learned to recognize in 4 decades of warfare. Fear. Jack, it's Hawk. I need you. Jack closed his eyes. 4 words that carried the weight of history. How many times had he heard those words? How many times had answering them led to blood and screaming and carrying wounded men through smoke? I'm retired, Colonel. Static on the line, wind howling outside. Then Hawk spoke again, and this time the fear was naked. I've got 6 SEALs trapped in Frozen Valley. 20 clicks northeast of here. Heavy contact from elevated positions. Weather's grounded all air support. QRF won't reach them for 4 hours. They're kids, Jack, good kids. And they're going to die unless someone can reach those ridge lines from distance. Jack looked at the photographs on the mantle, 8 red circles, 8 ghosts who never got old enough to be called anything but kids. You've got plenty of shooters on base. Not like you. Not anyone who knows these mountains. Not anyone who can make a shot at 4,000 meters in a blizzard. Please, Jack. They're running out of time. The silence stretched. Outside, a raven called from the pine trees. Inside, the clock on the wall ticked away seconds that men 20 kilometers away didn't have to spare. Jack thought about saying no. Thought about hanging up, going back to his workout, his coffee, his quiet morning routine that kept the ghosts at bay. Then he thought about his son James, 26 years old, bleeding out in a Fallujah street while insurgents took pot shots at the medevac helicopter. If someone could have reached him, if someone with the skills and the rifle and the will could have made a difference. I'll be there in 30 minutes. He hung up before Hawk could thank him. Gratitude meant nothing. Only results mattered. Jack dressed for war with the same precision he'd dressed for the day. Thermal base layer, soft shell pants, merino wool mid-layer, Gore-Tex outer shell rated to -40, boots with aggressive tread and insulation, neck gaiter, balaclava, gloves rated for trigger work in sub-zero temperatures. Every piece of gear chosen for function over comfort, for survival over style. He packed his ruck with methodical efficiency. Chaytak M200 broken down into components. 12 rounds of .408 Chaytak ammunition. Each round hand-loaded for consistent ballistics. Spotting scope, rangefinder, weather station, medical kit, water, energy bars, knife, pistol, radio, nothing unnecessary, nothing forgotten. Before leaving, he stood one last time before the photograph of the 10 men in Afghanistan. He'd made this same pilgrimage before every mission for 30 years. A ritual of remembrance. A promise renewed. I won't miss this time. The words were whisper, prayer, vow. Then Jack McCallister, Master Chief Petty Officer retired, picked up his rifle and walked out into the snow. The drive to Black Ridge took 22 minutes on roads that weren't properly cleared. Jack's F-150 handled the conditions with the indifference of a vehicle that had survived worse. He drove in silence, no radio, no music, just the sound of tires on packed snow and the diesel engine's rumble. The gate guard at Black Ridge was maybe 19 years old. Baby-faced, bundled in a parka 3 sizes too big, looking cold and bored in the way only very young soldiers assigned to very boring posts could look. He stepped out of the guard shack, breath fogging, and waved Jack to a stop. "ID, please, sir." Jack handed over his retired military ID card. The guard studied it, frowned, checked a clipboard, frowned deeper. "Sir, I don't see you on the access list. Colonel Harrison is expecting me." The guard looked uncertain. Radio protocol said one thing. The hard-eyed old man in the truck said another. He was still young enough to believe protocols mattered more than judgment. "I'll need to call this in, sir." Jack waited without comment. The guard retreated to the shack, made a call, returned looking confused and slightly embarrassed. "Sir, the colonel says to send you straight to the command center. And he says to apologize for the delay. And he says," he paused, reading from notes. "He says, tell the old bastard to move his ass because we're out of time." Jack almost smiled. Hawk had learned well. The base had changed in 18 months. New buildings, new faces, new technology everywhere. Young soldiers moved with the confidence of people who'd never been in a real fight, only the careful choreography of training exercises. They looked at Jack's truck with curiosity. An F-150 with rust spots and a gun rack didn't fit the image of modern warfare. Jack parked outside the command center and grabbed his rifle case. Inside, the temperature jumped 40 degrees. Heat, light, the hum of computers and the chatter of radios. A dozen personnel moving with controlled urgency. Maps on screens, satellite feeds, real-time data streams that would have seemed like science fiction in Jack's early career. Colonel Robert Harrison stood at the center of it all. 55 years old, silver hair cut high and tight, shoulders still broad enough to carry the weight of command. He saw Jack and crossed the room in 3 strides, hand extended. Jack took the hand. The grip was firm, familiar, carrying history neither man needed to speak aloud. "Good to see you, old man." "Not that old. What's the situation?" Hawk turned to a large display screen showing topographical maps overlaid with icons and data streams. He pointed to a valley marked in red. "SEAL recon element, callsign Reaper. 6 men. They went in 72 hours ago tracking a high-value target. Made contact 20 minutes ago. Got ambushed. Now they're pinned in Frozen Valley at grid November 74582. Hostiles have the high ground on 3 sides. We count at least 20 fighters with crew-served weapons. Reapers down to 4 effectives. They won't last another hour." Jack studied the map. Frozen Valley, he knew it, had operated there in the late 80s training Afghan resistance fighters. Before the politics got complicated, before friends became enemies and enemies became friends and nobody could remember why they were fighting, except that stopping meant admitting it had all been for nothing. Air support? Grounded. Weather's too severe. Visibility's less than 50 meters. Winds gusting over 60 knots. No pilots putting a bird up in that mess. QRF? Rolling now. But they've got 8 clicks of rough terrain to cover in a blizzard. 4 hours minimum. Jack traced lines on the map with his finger, calculating angles and distances with the same unconscious competence that let him drive without thinking about which pedal was brake and which was gas. "You need overwatch from Ridgepoint Alpha. That's the only position with line of sight into that valley." Hawk nodded. "That's exactly what I need. And I need someone who can make shots at 4,000 meters in conditions that would make most snipers pack up and go home. That's extreme distance, even with modern equipment. You've done it before." The words hung in the air between them. Jack felt the weight of history pressing down. Afghanistan, 1989, 3,540 meters. The shot that should have ended a war but instead started a massacre. That was 30 years ago. Some things you don't forget. Jack looked at the map again. Saw not just terrain features and grid coordinates, but ghosts. David Chen dying in snow. Tommy Martinez unconscious and bleeding. 8 good men reduced to names on a memorial wall. What if I can't make the shot? Then 6 more men die. But if you don't try, they die for certain. At least this way they have a chance. The logic was irrefutable. Jack had spent 4 decades making impossible decisions based on probability and necessity. This was just another calculation, another roll of dice loaded in favor of death. He nodded once. "I'll need a spotter. Already arranged. She's waiting in the briefing room." "She?" Jack's eyebrows rose. In his day, female snipers existed but were rare enough to warrant comment. Times changed. He wasn't sure he'd changed with them, but that was a problem for philosophers, not warriors. The briefing room was exactly what Jack expected. Rectangular table, chairs that didn't fit human anatomy, fluorescent lights that turned everyone's skin the color of corpses, and 8 people who stopped talking the moment he walked through the door. 6 were young SEALs, ages ranging from mid-20s to mid-30s. Hard bodies, harder stares, the casual arrogance of men who'd passed selection and believed themselves immortal. They looked at Jack the way youth always looked at age, with pity mixed with disdain. Another old-timer living in past glories. The 7th person was different. Senior Chief Daniel Reeves, 45 years old, built like a refrigerator, with a face that looked like it had stopped fists for sport. He stood when Jack entered, and something in his expression suggested recognition. The 8th person was a woman. Lieutenant Sarah Chen stood near the back wall, arms crossed, watching everything with eyes that missed nothing. 5'6", athletic build suggesting she spent more time in the gym than the chow hall. Asian American features, 28 years old if Jack was any judge. And cradled in her arms like a child was a MK-13 Mod 7 sniper rifle. Hawk made introductions with economy. "Gentlemen, this is Master Chief McCallister. He'll be running Overwatch for Reaper's extraction." A SEAL lieutenant named Brad Cooper, 28 years old with the kind of swagger that came from never having failed at anything important, looked Jack up and down with barely concealed contempt. "Who's the grandpa?" Jack met his eyes without expression. The stare that had intimidated Taliban fighters and cartel sicarios and insurgents of every flavor. The stare that said, "I've forgotten more about killing than you'll ever learn." "This grandpa was shooting men in the face before your daddy's nuts dropped, son. Sit down and shut your mouth." The room went silent. Cooper's face flushed red, but he had enough sense to recognize when he'd stepped in something deep. He sat. Senior Chief Reeves cleared his throat, and when he spoke, his voice carried weight. "Longshot McCallister? The Longshot?" Jack winced at the call sign he'd spent 18 months trying to forget. But Reeves was already turning to the other SEALs, his tone that of a teacher addressing particularly slow students. 3,540 meters. Afghanistan, 1989. Hindu Kush Mountains. Wind gusting to 35 knots. Temperature -15. Target was a Soviet Spetsnaz colonel training Mujahideen fighters. 1 shot, 1 kill. It's in the fucking record books. This man is a legend. Jack's jaw tightened. Legends were lies told by survivors. But before he could speak, Lieutenant Sarah Chen stepped forward. Her voice was calm, professional, carrying none of Cooper's arrogance or Reeves' hero worship. "Master Chief McCallister, I've studied that shot. The ballistic calculations you made without computer assistance. The wind reading using nothing but mirage and feel. The Coriolis adjustment. It was brilliant work." Jack looked at her properly for the first time, saw intelligence in her eyes, saw confidence without cockiness, saw something that reminded him uncomfortably of himself at that age. The belief that skill and preparation could overcome any obstacle. "Don't believe everything you read, Lieutenant." Hawk interrupted before the conversation could continue. "Chen will be your spotter. She's our top graduate from sniper school. Never made a shot over 1,000 meters in combat, but she's put 200 rounds through the X-ring at that distance in training." Jack turned his attention fully to Sarah. "Training ain't combat. You freeze up, people die." Sarah met his gaze without flinching. "Then I guess you better teach me not to freeze." Somewhere in the back of the room, Reeves muttered to Cooper, "She's got balls." Jack studied Sarah Chen for 3 long seconds, saw determination, saw preparation, saw youth's greatest strength and greatest weakness, the inability to imagine failure. He'd been the same way once. Then failure had introduced itself with mortar fire and screaming. "Get your gear, Lieutenant. We roll in 15. The armory smelled of gun oil and steel, and the particular chemical tang of ammunition stored in climate-controlled environment. Jack worked in silence, breaking down the Shaytak M200, inspecting each component with the care of a surgeon preparing for a delicate operation. Stock, barrel, bolt assembly, scope rings, every piece examined, confirmed functional, reassembled with precision measured in microns. Sarah Chen worked at the adjacent bench, preparing her own rifle. Jack watched from the corner of his eye, evaluating. Her movements were efficient, practiced. She knew her weapon. But there was a difference between knowing and understanding, between mechanical competence and the kind of bone-deep familiarity that turned a rifle into an extension of your own nervous system. That's not military issue. Jack didn't look up from cleaning the Chaytak's barrel. It's mine. Bought it when I retired. Sarah glanced at the rifle with professional interest. Why not the Barrett? .50 BMG is overkill for most applications. 408 Chaytak has superior ballistics at extreme range, flatter trajectory, less affected by wind, better energy retention. You've put a lot of thought into this. 40 years worth. Sarah nodded, processing. Then carefully, as if testing dangerous ground. My father taught me never to stop learning. Your father military? Army Ranger. He didn't come home from Afghanistan. Jack's hands paused on the barrel for just a moment, then continued their work. What year? 2001. Operation Anaconda. Different war, Jack thought. Different mountain range. Different enemy wearing different uniforms fighting for different reasons. But the mountains didn't care about politics. Mountains killed without ideology. Sorry for your loss. Sarah's voice carried no self-pity. Thank you. He died doing what he believed in. That's more than most people get. Jack grunted acknowledgement and returned to his rifle. They worked in silence for several minutes. Then Sarah spoke again, her tone shifting from personal to professional. Master Chief, can I ask you something? You're going to anyway. Why did you really retire? You're only 62. Plenty of snipers work into their late 60s as instructors. Jack's jaw tightened. That's none of your business, Lieutenant. If we're going into combat together, it is my business. I need to know you won't freeze. The words struck like a physical blow. Jack turned slowly, his expression dangerous. I don't freeze. Sarah held her ground, chin raised. Then why did you hesitate when Commander Harrison mentioned Afghanistan '89? For a long moment, Jack considered multiple responses, telling her to mind her own goddamn business, pulling rank, walking out. But underneath the anger, he recognized something valuable. She was doing what a good spotter should do, assessing her shooter, making sure the weapon wouldn't malfunction when it mattered most. And she was right to ask, because Jack wasn't sure of the answer himself. Get your gear. We move in 10 minutes. He turned away before she could press further, but the question lingered in the air between them like cordite smoke. The Black Hawk helicopter shuddered in turbulence that would have grounded any sane pilot. But Marine Captain Richard Brick Morrison had spent 20 years flying in conditions that made other pilots call in sick. He held the bird steady through sheer force of will and an intimate understanding of how much punishment a UH-60 could absorb before the laws of physics sent everyone aboard to meet their maker. In the troop compartment, Jack sat strapped into a seat that hadn't been designed for human comfort. Sarah Chen sat beside him, face pale but jaw set with determination. Senior Chief Reeves sat across from them with 4 Army Rangers who'd volunteered for security duty. Their young faces showed various stages of controlled terror as the helicopter bucked and rolled. The pilot's voice crackled over the intercom. This is insane. I can't see shit. Jack keyed his mic, his voice carrying the calm of someone who'd made this flight a dozen times in worse conditions. Follow the valley north. When you see the rock formation shaped like a closed fist, bank east. Ridge Point Alpha is 400 meters past that. How the hell do you know? I've flown this route before. The helicopter followed Jack's directions with the precision of GPS coordinates. Visibility was less than 30 meters. Snow flew past the windows in horizontal sheets. Wind shook the airframe hard enough to rattle teeth. But Morrison held course, trusting the old man who spoke with the certainty of someone who'd bought his knowledge with blood. Sarah leaned close to Jack, raising her voice over the engine noise. Master Chief, can I ask you something? Jack kept his eyes on the window. You're persistent. Why did you really come back? You clearly don't want to be here. Jack thought about the question, about the photographs on his mantle, about his son James bleeding out in Fallujah while someone who could have helped was too far away, or too scared, or too untrained. About 8 men in Afghanistan who died because their shooter missed by 2 inches. Commander Harrison said kids were dying. I've got kids. Had kids. He paused, the pain of James's death still fresh after 2 decades. Lost one in Fallujah. If someone could have saved him, I'd want them to try. Sarah absorbed this. When she spoke again, her voice was softer. I lost my father when I was 7. I barely remember him, but my mom always said he died doing what he believed in, protecting others. That's why I enlisted, to understand what made him willing to leave us. And do you understand? Not yet. But maybe after today I will. Reeves interrupted the moment. Chief, I gotta ask, the shot in '89, 3,540 meters. How'd you calculate wind without digital tools? Jack's expression went flat. The question he'd been dreading, the wound that never healed. But lying served no purpose. These people were going into combat with him. They deserved truth. Wind flags every 500 meters. Mirage reading through the scope. Feel of air on skin. And a lot of math done in your head while your heart tries to beat out of your chest. You missed, though. Hit shoulder instead of center mass. The cabin went silent except for engine noise and wind. Every eye turned to Jack. He felt the weight of their attention like physical pressure. 2 inches. Sarah's voice was gentle. 2 inches at 3,540 meters? That's barely a miss. Most snipers would be proud. Those 2 inches cost 8 men their lives. The words came out harder than Jack intended. Harsher. Carrying 3 decades of guilt compressed into 6 words. Sarah recoiled slightly. Reeves looked away. Even the Rangers who didn't know the story understood they'd stumbled into sacred ground. The silence stretched until a voice from the back broke it. Tommy Martinez, 58 years old, combat medic, the only other survivor of that day in Afghanistan. His weathered face carried scars that matched Jack's. Jack, we've been over this 1,000 times. None of us blame you. You were unconscious, Doc. You didn't see. I saw enough when I woke up. And I saw you carry my ass 8 clicks through a blizzard. You saved my life. I should have saved all of them. You're not God, Sarah said quietly. You're just a man with a rifle. Jack looked at her, found himself wondering what her father had been like, if he'd taught her that wisdom or if she'd learned it the hard way. Today, that better be enough. The helicopter banked hard, throwing everyone against their restraints. Morrison's voice came over the intercom. 30 seconds to LZ, hold on to your asses. Ridge Point Alpha lived up to its name. A knife edge of rock jutting from the mountainside at 8,400 feet elevation, exposed to wind that howled with the fury of a living thing. Temperature was -18 Fahrenheit before wind chill, with wind chill cold enough to freeze exposed skin in minutes. Snow fell in thick curtains that reduced the world to shades of white and gray. Jack moved with the efficiency of long practice. Ruck off, rifle out, bipod deployed, position selected behind a low rock formation that provided minimal cover and no comfort. Sarah worked beside him, setting up the spotting scope and weather station with careful precision. The Rangers formed a security perimeter, though anyone attacking this position would have to be either suicidal or desperate. Jack settled into prone position. Left leg cocked at 90 degrees, right leg straight, body at slight angle to center line, weight balanced, breathing controlled, every adjustment refined by 10,000 hours of practice. The Chaytak M200 settled into his hands like coming home. Through the Schmidt and Bender scope, magnified 12 times, the world shrank to a circle of enhanced reality. He scanned across 4,000 meters of vertical terrain, searching through snow and distance for the valley where 6 men were fighting for their lives. Sarah worked the spotting scope beside him. Her voice was calm, professional, reading data from instruments. Wind speed 41 knots, northwest, gusting to 48, temperature -18. Barometric pressure 24.7. Jack felt the wind on his face, watched snow patterns, read the mountain the way some men read books. The instruments gave numbers. Numbers were useful, but there was a language older than mathematics, written in moving air and shifting light, and Jack had spent 40 years learning its grammar. Winds 43 sustained, gusts hitting 52. Weather station says, I don't care what the machine says. I'm telling you, 43 sustained. Sarah bit back the response, adjusted her calculations, recorded the correction without argument. Smart girl, Jack thought, learning to trust experience over technology. That might keep her alive. The radio crackled, Hawk's voice tight with urgency. Longshot, this is Viper 6. Reaper is 30 seconds from being overrun. We need fire now. Jack's hands moved across the rifle, making micro adjustments with unconscious competence. Range estimation, wind calculation, temperature effects, humidity factors, Coriolis effect from Earth's rotation, spin drift from bullet rotation, elevation changes, barometric pressure, 20 variables running simultaneous calculations in a brain that had solved this equation 1,000 times. Through the scope, the valley resolved into tactical clarity. 6 shapes, no, 4 now, huddled behind boulder cover, surrounded on 3 sides by fighters wearing mixed civilian and military gear. AK-47s and RPKs, maybe an RPG team. Muzzle flashes bright against snow. Priority target, East Ridge, command element. Sarah found them through the spotting scope. Confirmed. I count 3 probable leaders. Center position, guy in the long coat. Range, 4,187 meters. Jack dialed the range into the scope. His breathing slowed. Heart rate dropped from 70 beats per minute to 48. The zone. The place where time stretched and thought became action without conscious decision. Through the scope, magnification brought distance into sharp focus. The man in the long coat stood behind the fighting line, gesturing to subordinates. Tall, broad-shouldered, fur hat, and heavy winter gear, directing the assault with the confidence of someone who'd done this before. Jack centered the crosshairs on the target's chest, calculated hold-off for wind and elevation. 14 feet left, 9.2 feet up. Time of flight, 7.6 seconds. Probability of hit at this range in these conditions, maybe 60%, maybe less. His finger took up slack on the trigger. 2 pounds of pressure, then 3. 4 would break the shot. And Jack froze. The face in the scope, even at 4,000 meters, even through falling snow, something about the posture, the shape, triggered recognition that bypassed conscious thought and went straight to hindbrain memory. That couldn't be. Impossible. But Jack had learned that impossible was just another word for things you hadn't seen yet. And the man in his scope, the man he was about to kill, was impossible in the flesh. Colonel Nikolai Volkov, the target from 1989. The man Jack had shot from 3,540 meters on a mountainside in Afghanistan. The man who should have died but lived because Jack's bullet landed 2 inches right of center mass. The man whose survival had led to 8 dead Americans and 30 years of guilt. He was alive, and judging by the way he suddenly turned to face Ridgepoint Alpha, looking directly up at a position he shouldn't have been able to see, he knew exactly who was behind that scope. Jack's hands began to shake. Flashback hit like mortar fire. David Chen dying. Blood melting snow. Tommy Martinez unconscious. 8 red circles on a photograph. 30 years of nightmares compressed into one frozen moment of recognition. Sarah's voice cut through the fog. Master Chief, you have the shot. What are you waiting for? Jack couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. His finger had gone numb on the trigger. The radio erupted with urgency. Longshot, they're moving. Take the shot. Sarah saw it then. The tremor in Jack's hands. The rapid breathing. The 1,000-yard stare that had nothing to do with distance and everything to do with time. Jack, you're freezing up. Jack's voice came out as whisper. That's Volkov. Nikolai Volkov. He's alive. I didn't kill him. Sarah processed this, made the connection. The man from '89, the target you missed. Through the scope, Volkov smiled, raised one hand in mock salute. He knew. Somehow, impossibly, he knew Jack was here. Had known all along. This wasn't random ambush. This was trap. Bait. Revenge 30 years in the making. In the valley, the assault intensified. Grenades, automatic fire. Men screaming, the countdown clock to death ticking away in real time. Sarah made a decision, her voice cut through with absolute authority. Jack, I don't care who that is. If you don't take this shot right now, 6 men die. Your choice. Jack's mind spun. Miss again. Cost more lives. Prove that the old warrior had nothing left but memories and mistakes. That retirement hadn't been choice but necessity. That some wounds never healed because they weren't meant to. I can't. What if I miss again? Then I'll take the shot. You've never shot combat distance over. Then guide me. You wanted to teach me? Teach me now. The words struck like ice water. Jack looked at Sarah Chen, saw determination younger than his oldest son would have been, saw confidence he'd once possessed, saw possibility he'd forgotten existed. In that moment, surrounded by howling wind and falling snow, 4,000 meters from men dying because an old man's hands shook, Jack McCallister made the hardest decision of his life. Not to take the shot, but to let someone else take it. Okay, get on the rifle. Sarah slid behind the Chaytak without hesitation. Jack moved beside her as spotter. Their roles reversed. Experience supporting youth instead of the other way around. Everything he'd believed about himself inverted in the space of a heartbeat. His voice became instructor mode. Automatic. Drawing on 40 years of training people to kill at distance. 4,187 meters. Wind 43 knots sustained, gusting 52. Hold 14 feet left, 9.2 up. Time of flight 7.6 seconds. Aim small, miss small, on my count. Sarah's breathing slowed. Jack watched her settle into the zone. Saw himself 30 years ago. Before the miss, before the guilt, before the photographs on the mantle. 3, 2, 1. Sarah fired. The Chaytak roared. Recoil drove the rifle back into Sarah's shoulder. Muzzle blast kicked up snow in a white explosion. The sound echoed off mountains and vanished into wind. For 7.6 seconds, the bullet flew. A piece of copper and lead weighing 450 grains, spinning at 280,000 RPM, traveling at 3,000 feet per second. Fighting wind, fighting gravity. Fighting distance and cold and every law of physics that said hitting a man-sized target at 2.5 miles in a blizzard was impossible. Jack watched through the spotting scope, saw Volkov standing tall, confident, waiting for the shot he thought would miss because it had missed before. The bullet hit Volkov in the upper chest, center mass. The impact threw him backward off his feet. He disappeared into snow and didn't move again. Sarah's voice was shaking but controlled. Target down? Jack adjusted the spotting scope, saw enemy fighters frozen in confusion, saw their command structure collapse, saw assault momentum break like a wave hitting rock. Target down. Clean hit. He keyed the radio. Viper 6, this is Longshot. Hostile command eliminated. Reaper has breathing room. Hawk's voice came back filled with relief. Confirmed. Reaper is moving. QRF has them on visual. They're going to make it. Sarah sagged against the rifle. Around them, Rangers whooped and high-fived. Reeves was grinning ear to ear. Even Doc Tommy was smiling. But Jack sat motionless, staring through the spotting scope at the place where Nikolai Volkov had fallen. 30 years. 30 years of guilt. 30 years of believing the miss defined him. And in 7.6 seconds, a 28-year-old woman had proven to all that the shot was possible, that conditions hadn't been impossible, that maybe, just maybe, Jack had been too hard on himself for 3 decades. Or maybe she'd just gotten lucky where he'd gotten unlucky. Either way, 6 men were alive who wouldn't be. Sarah turned to look at him. Her face was pale, hands shaking from adrenaline crash, but her eyes were clear. Master Chief, are you okay? Jack realized he'd been holding his breath, let it out slowly. Looked at this young woman who'd just saved 6 lives and possibly freed him from a 30-year prison. Yeah, Lieutenant, I'm okay, he paused. That was a hell of a shot. You gave me good data. Data doesn't pull the trigger. They sat in snow at 8,000 feet, wind screaming around them, and shared a moment of understanding that needed no words. The passing of something from one generation to the next. Knowledge, skill, legacy. The helicopter ride back was quieter than the ride out. Men who'd been terrified now carried the loose-limbed exhaustion of adrenaline crash. Sarah sat with her eyes closed, processing what she'd done. Reeves kept looking at Jack with newfound respect that bordered on awe. Even Cooper had shut his mouth. Jack stared out the window at mountains sliding past. His mind replayed the shot over and over. Not Sarah's shot, his shot, Afghanistan, 1989. 2 inches, 2 goddamn inches that had defined 30 years. But Volkov had been alive, had been in Colorado, had set up the ambush specifically to draw Jack out, which meant the shot in '89 hadn't been simple miss. It meant something else, something Jack didn't understand yet, but felt lurking at the edges of understanding. Doc Tommy slid into the seat beside him, had to shout over engine noise. You did good today. I didn't do anything. Sarah made the shot. You taught her how. That counts. Jack shook his head. I froze, Tommy. I had the shot and I froze. If she hadn't been there, but she was there. That's what teams are for. Covering each other's weak spots. When did I get weak spots? Tommy laughed. Jack, we're 60+ years old. We're nothing but weak spots held together by scar tissue and stubbornness. The question isn't whether we've got weaknesses. It's whether we're smart enough to let younger people cover them. Jack thought about that, about Sarah's competence, about her willingness to step up when he stepped back, about the fact that maybe being old didn't mean being useless, just meant being different. The Black Hawk touched down at Black Ridge with the gentleness of a ballet dancer. Morrison was showing off now that the hard part was done. They piled out into cold that felt warm compared to Ridgepoint Alpha. Hawk was waiting on the tarmac. Behind him, 4 men in various stages of medical treatment, the survivors of Reaper Team. Bloody, battered, exhausted, alive. Captain Marcus Thompson, team leader, stepped forward. bandage around his head, arm in a sling, but eyes clear and focused. He snapped a salute that Jack returned automatically. Master Chief McCallister? Captain Marcus Thompson, I wanted to thank you. We were done. Dead men walking. Then someone started dropping their command element, and we had a chance. So thank you. Jack opened his mouth to correct him, to explain Sarah had made the shot, but Hawk interrupted. Captain, let me introduce the shooter. This is Lieutenant Sarah Chen. Thompson turned to Sarah, surprise evident. Ma'am, that was you? Sarah nodded, uncomfortable with attention. Yes, sir. How far was that shot? 4,187 meters. Thompson whistled. In that weather, that's impossible. Sarah glanced at Jack. Master Chief McCallister provided data and coaching. I just pulled the trigger. Thompson looked between them, processing, then nodded slowly. Well, whoever did what, you saved 6 lives today. Thank you both. He offered his hand. Sarah shook it. Then Thompson turned to Jack. Master Chief, I don't know if anyone told you. My father served with you. Vietnam. Lieutenant Robert Thompson. He spoke about you often. Jack felt ice form in his stomach. Robert Thompson, young lieutenant, good soldier, KIA in 1972 during the Easter Offensive. One of too many faces that visited Jack's nightmares. Your father was a good man. I'm sorry I couldn't bring him home. You brought plenty of others home, sir. He would have been proud of what you did today. Thompson saluted again and walked away with his team. Jack stood frozen, mind churning. The son of Robert Thompson, 40-something years old, saved today by a shot that wouldn't have been possible without Jack's instruction. Circles within circles. Generations connected by bullets and blood. Sarah touched his arm gently. Master Chief, are you all right? Jack realized everyone was staring at him and waiting for the legendary Longshot McCallister to say something profound. Some wisdom earned through 40 years and 10,000 shots. But he had nothing, just exhaustion and confusion and the strange feeling that his entire life had been preparation for one moment that someone else had executed. I need to debrief, he said finally. Hawk, your office. Inside Hawk's office, away from the noise and celebration, Jack slumped into a chair. Every one of his 62 years pressed down on shoulders that had carried too much for too long. Hawk poured 2 glasses of bourbon, handed one to Jack. They drank in silence. You froze, Hawk said finally. Not an accusation, a statement of fact. Jack nodded. Couldn't take the shot. Why? Because the target was Volkov, Nikolai Volkov, the man from '89. He's alive, Hawk, and he's here. And he knew I was up there. Hawk processed this. The intelligence implications, the tactical concerns, but what he said was, you're sure. Jack closed his eyes, saw the face in the scope, felt recognition in his bones. I'm sure. Then we've got a bigger problem than one ambush. If Volkov's operating in Colorado, if he's targeting SEALs specifically, it's personal, Jack said. He's here because of me. That ambush was bait. He wanted me out there. Did he know you'd freeze? Jack's hands tightened around the glass. Maybe. Or maybe he thought I'd take the shot and miss again. Either way, he wins. Either I prove I'm washed up, or I kill him and he gets martyrdom. But Sarah killed him instead. Yeah, Jack drank. She's good, Hawk. Better than I was at her age. Maybe better than I ever was. Hawk smiled. High praise from Longshot McCallister. Don't call me that. That man's dead, has been for 30 years. Is he? Because from where I sat, Longshot just taught a new generation how to make impossible shots. Sounds alive to me. Jack wanted to argue. Wanted to explain that watching someone else succeed where you failed wasn't resurrection. It was confirmation of inadequacy. But he was too tired, too old, too confused by the day's events to articulate the tangle of emotions. I'm going home. Jack, wait. Hawk pulled a folder from his desk. Preliminary intel on Volkov. We've been tracking him for 6 months. Arms dealer. Drug trafficker. War criminal from the Soviet era. He disappeared after the USSR collapsed, resurfaced 5 years ago running operations in South America and Central Asia. 3 months ago, he showed up in Colorado. Why Colorado? Hawk looked uncomfortable. Best we can tell, he's been asking questions about your retirement, your location, your capabilities. And according to intercepted communications, he's not working alone. He's got a team, resources, and he's not finished. Finished with what? Hawk met Jack's eyes, revenge. Volkov's been hunting you for 30 years. Today was just the opening move. Jack felt cold that had nothing to do with temperature. So what you're saying is, I need to kill him. What I'm saying is he's going to keep coming until one of you is dead. And I need you to train Sarah Chen and any other snipers who can operate at extreme distance. Because if Volkov's got the resources we think he does, today was just the beginning. Jack wanted to refuse, wanted to go back to his cabin, his photographs, his quiet mornings drinking coffee and pretending the past was dead. But he thought about Captain Thompson, about Sarah Chen making an impossible shot, about 6 men alive who shouldn't be. How long? Hawk smiled. As long as it takes. Jack stood, bones creaking. I'll think about it. Outside, snow had stopped falling, sky clearing to reveal stars scattered like shrapnel across black velvet. Jack stood on the steps of the command center, breathing cold air, trying to organize thoughts that refused organization. Master Chief? Sarah Chen approached from the shadows, still in combat gear, face smudged with camouflage paint and exhaustion, but eyes alert, the look of someone running on fumes and willpower. Lieutenant, I wanted to ask you something, if you have a minute. Jack greeted. They walked away from the building out into snow that crunched under boots, found a spot near the perimeter fence where they could see mountains outlined against stars. Sarah spoke without preamble. Today when you froze, was it because you were scared or because you didn't trust yourself anymore? Jack considered lying, considered pulling rank, considered a dozen deflections. But Sarah had saved 6 lives today. She deserved honesty. Both. I saw the target and knew who it was. The man I missed 30 years ago, and I thought, what if I miss again? What if I've lost it? What if I'm just an old man pretending he's still useful? And now? Now I don't know. You made the shot I couldn't make. Does that mean I'm washed up? Or does it mean I was smart enough to let someone better take it? Sarah smiled. Master Chief, you gave me every piece of data I needed. Range, wind, hold off, timing. Without you, I'd have had no idea where to aim. So maybe you didn't pull the trigger, but you sure as hell made the shot possible. That's generous? It's accurate, Sarah paused. My father used to say that being a warrior isn't about never needing help. It's about knowing when to ask for it. You asked me to take the shot. That's not weakness, that's wisdom. Jack felt something loosen in his chest, a tension he'd carried so long he'd forgotten it was there. Maybe she was right. Maybe passing the rifle to someone younger wasn't admission of failure. Maybe it was evolution. Your father sounds like he was a smart man. He was. Sarah's voice went soft. I wish I'd known him better, but I know he'd be proud of what we did today. They stood in companionable silence. 2 warriors separated by 34 years and countless experiences, united by the strange mathematics of violence at distance. Finally, Jack spoke. Hawk wants me to train you and others, teach extreme distance shooting, build a program. What do you want? Jack looked at the stars, thought about photographs on his mantle, about 8 red circles, about a son who died in Fallujah, about 30 years spent believing he'd failed when maybe he'd just been human. I want to make sure no one else carries the guilt I've carried. If I can teach people to make shots I couldn't make, maybe that's enough. Sarah nodded. Then I'd be honored to learn from you, Master Chief. Jack almost smiled. Call me Jack. Master Chief makes me feel old. You are old. Now Jack did smile. Smartass. They walked back toward the base together. Above them, stars wheeled in their eternal dance. Below them, mountains kept their secrets. And somewhere in the darkness, Nikolai Volkov's body lay in snow, a ghost finally laid to rest. But Jack knew better than to believe one ghost explained everything. Hawk had said Volkov wasn't working alone, which meant somewhere out there other enemies waited, other shots needed taking, other lives needed saving. And for the first time in 30 years, Jack McCallister felt something he'd forgotten existed. Purpose. Not the purpose of youth, all confidence and invincibility, but the purpose of age, tempered by failure and loss, and the hard-won knowledge that perfection was impossible but trying mattered anyway. He'd frozen today, but he hadn't failed. Sarah had made the shot, 6 men lived, and maybe, just maybe, an old warrior had one more mission left in him after all. The cabin felt different when Jack returned that night. Same furniture, same photographs, same ghosts. But something had shifted. Some weight had lifted. He stood before the mantle, looking at the photograph of 10 men in Afghanistan. 8 red circles. 8 names he'd carried like stones for 30 years. I didn't fail you, he said to the photograph. Not completely, I did my best. And today I helped someone else do theirs. Maybe that's enough. The ghost didn't answer, but Jack thought maybe their silence was different now. Less accusatory, more accepting. He'd never know if the shot in '89 was his fault or just bad luck compounded by impossible conditions. But he knew that today he'd made a choice that saved lives. And tomorrow he'd make the same choice again. He picked up a marker and looked at the photograph. Almost added a ninth red circle for Volkov. But stopped. Volkov hadn't been one of his men. Volkov had been the enemy. And enemies didn't deserve space on the mantle reserved for brothers. Instead, Jack took out his phone, the smartphone he'd refused to buy, and called Hawk. The colonel answered on the second ring. Jack, I'll do it. Train Chen and anyone else who needs it. Build your program, but on one condition. Name it. When we're done, when I've taught them everything I know, I'm really retiring. No callbacks, no emergencies, no one last missions. Done. Hawk chuckled. Deal. Report Monday morning 0700. And Jack, thank you. Jack ended the call and looked at the photographs one last time. At Elizabeth smiling in her wedding dress. At James in his marine blues. At David Chen and Tommy Martinez, and 8 others who never got old enough to be called anything but heroes. I'm not done yet, he told them. Got a few things left to teach, a few debts left to pay. Then maybe I can rest. Outside, snow began falling again. Winter in the Rockies never truly ended. It just paused between storms. But Jack McCallister had spent 40 years learning to shoot in snow and wind and cold that would kill lesser men. What was a little weather compared to 30 years of guilt finally beginning to lift? He made coffee, black, no sugar, sat in his chair by the fireplace. And for the first time in 3 decades, he slept without dreaming of red circles and snow stained with blood. Tomorrow would bring the new challenges, new students, new missions. But tonight, an old warrior had taken the first step toward peace. Not by making an impossible shot, but by teaching someone else to make it. And in that teaching, found something he thought he'd lost forever. Purpose, redemption, hope. The rest would come in time. Monday morning arrived with the kind of cold that made men question their life choices. Jack McCallister stood outside the Black Ridge sniper range at 0645, 15 minutes early, because punctuality was a religion he'd practiced for 40 years. The range stretched across a natural valley, targets positioned at intervals from 100 to 2,000 meters. Beyond that, the mountains offered unlimited distance for those crazy enough to attempt it. Sarah Chen arrived at 0655, also early, carrying her rifle case and a notebook. Behind her came Senior Chief Daniel Reeves and 3 other SEALs Jack didn't know yet. Young faces, hard eyes, the lean hunger of men who'd chosen a profession with no retirement plan except death or disability. Colonel Hawk Harrison emerged from the operations building, coffee steaming in the cold air. He nodded to Jack with the easy familiarity of men who'd bled together decades ago. Gentlemen and lady, this is Master Chief Jack McCallister. Some of you know his history. For those who don't, he holds the record for longest confirmed kill at 3,540 meters. He's forgotten more about long-range shooting than most of us will ever learn. And starting today, he's going to teach you how to make shots that shouldn't be possible. One of the SEALs, a kid maybe 25 with a cookie grin, raised his hand. Sir, with all due respect, isn't the Master Chief a little... He paused, searching for diplomatic words that didn't exist. Old for this? Jack looked at the kid without expression. The stare that had made Taliban fighters reconsider their life choices. What's your name, son? Petty Officer First Class, Jake Morrison, Master Chief. Well, Morrison, you're absolutely right. I am old. 62 last month. My knees hurt when it rains. My back's got more metal than a hardware store. And my hands shake when I hold them out too long. Jack paused, letting the words settle. But age and experience are 2 different things. Age means my body's breaking down. Experience means I know exactly how to compensate for it, which means I can still outshoot you on your best day. Want to test that theory? Morrison's grin faded. No, Master Chief. Smart answer. Now shut up and learn something. Hawk suppressed a smile. I'll leave you to it, Jack. They're all yours. The first hour was assessment. Jack made each shooter take 10 shots at 1,000 meters. No coaching, no assistance. Just raw skill laid bare for evaluation. He watched through a spotting scope, saying nothing, his face revealing nothing. But his mind cataloged every mistake, every bad habit, every shortcut that would get someone killed in real combat. Morrison was fast but sloppy, jerked the trigger, didn't properly account for wind, Reeves was solid but textbook. Did everything by the manual, which worked fine until conditions fell outside the manual's parameters. A tall SEAL named Carlos Mendez had natural talent but lacked confidence. Second-guessed himself. Hesitated. Another named Brian Foster was technically proficient but mechanical. No instinct, no feel. And Sarah Chen. Jack watched her 10 shots with special attention. She was good, damn good. Smooth trigger press, proper breathing, excellent fundamentals. But something was missing. Some indefinable quality that separated competent from exceptional. After everyone finished, Jack called them to the firing line, stood before them with the mountains at his back and 40 years of accumulated knowledge in his weathered face. You all passed basic sniper school. That makes you qualified. But qualified doesn't mean capable. Qualified means you can hit a stationary target at known distance in controlled conditions. Capable means you can hit a moving target at unknown distance in a snowstorm while someone's shooting back. There's a difference, and that difference is what separates the living from the dead. He pulled out a small notebook, worn leather cover, pages filled with entries in cramped handwriting. Numbers, dates, names. This is my data book. Started it in 1982. Every shot I've taken in combat is recorded here. Distance, wind, temperature, result. Hit or miss, kill or wound, everything. Jack looked up. By my count, I've taken 416 shots at enemy combatants, 392 hits, 24 misses. That's a 94% hit rate over 40 years. The SEALs shifted, impressed despite themselves. That was an extraordinary statistic. Jack's voice went flat. 24 misses. You know what misses mean in our line of work? They mean the enemy lives to shoot back. They mean your teammates die. They mean you go home and spend the next 30 years wondering if you could have done something different. Jack paused. I'm going to teach you how to minimize misses, not eliminate them. Nobody's perfect. But I'm going to get you as close to perfect as human beings can get. Over the next 6 hours, Jack rebuilt their understanding of long-range shooting from the ground up. He started with wind reading, the most critical and least understood skill in the sniper's toolbox. Forget your wind meters. Forget your weather stations. Those tools are useful, but they're not reliable. Wind changes constantly. What matters isn't what the wind's doing where you are. It's what it's doing between you and the target. And the only way to read that is with your eyes and your experience. He pointed to the valley. See those grass patches at 500 meters? Watch how they move. Light breeze makes them ripple. Strong wind makes them wave. You learn to judge wind speed by the movement. Now look at the mirage through your scope. See that shimmer? That's heat distortion. When wind blows across it, the mirage tilts. The angle tells you wind direction and speed. For 3 hours, they practiced wind reading, just looking through scopes and calling wind values. Jack corrected every mistake with patience that surprised even himself. Maybe age had mellowed him, or maybe teaching was easier than doing. Sarah absorbed the instruction like a sponge, absorbing water. She took notes between relay sessions, asking questions that showed she understood not just the what, but the why. The other SEALs noticed, started deferring to her observations. She was becoming the class leader without anyone officially appointing her. By noon, they broke for chow. The SEALs headed for the cafeteria. Jack remained at the range, eating an energy bar and staring at mountains that held more memories than he cared to count. Master Chief? Sarah approached carrying 2 cups of coffee, offered one to Jack. He took it, surprised by the gesture and by the fact she'd gotten it right. Black, no sugar. Thank you, Lieutenant. They stood in comfortable silence, drinking coffee that was better than military standard, but worse than civilian good. Finally, Sarah spoke. Can I ask you something personal? You will anyway. She smiled. Yesterday, when you froze, you said the target was someone from your past, someone you'd missed before, but you never explained why that shot mattered so much. Jack looked into his coffee cup, saw steam rising, saw faces reflected in dark liquid. David Chen, Tommy Martinez, 8 others who never got old enough to drink coffee on a cold Monday morning. Afghanistan, February 1989. I was 32. Master Chief, SEAL Team 3. We'd been tracking a Soviet Spetsnaz colonel named Nikolai Volkov. He was training Mujahideen fighters, teaching them advanced tactics, making them more effective killers. High-value target. Orders were to eliminate him. Sarah listened without interrupting. We found him in a valley not unlike this one. Distance was 3,540 meters. Longest shot I'd ever attempted. Wind was gusting to 35 knots. Temperature -15. My spotter was a lieutenant named David Chen, best friend I ever had. He gave me the data and I took the shot. And you missed. I hit him. Shoulder instead of center mass, 2 inches right of where I aimed. Wind pushed the bullet more than I calculated. Jack's jaw tightened. 2 inches. At that distance, 2 inches seems like nothing. But those 2 inches meant Volkov lived long enough to call in mortar support. They'd had counter-sniper teams waiting. They triangulated our position from the muzzle flash. Mortars started falling before we could displace. Sarah's eyes widened. The 8 men, the ones who died. Jack nodded. David Chen died in my arms. Tommy Martinez almost died. 8 good men reduced to names on a wall. And for 30 years, I've wondered if I could have made that shot. If I'd calculated wind better. If I'd waited for conditions to improve. If I'd been better at my job, maybe they'd still be alive. The silence stretched. Somewhere in the distance, a raven called. The sound was mournful, fitting. Master Chief, that wasn't your fault. Jack's voice was quiet. I pulled the trigger. In impossible conditions. Against an impossible target. Sarah's voice was firm. You made a shot 99% of snipers couldn't attempt. And you came within 2 inches. That's not failure. That's the limit of human capability. Try telling that to 8 widows and 23 children who grew up without fathers. Sarah had no answer for that. Some wounds went too deep for words. They finished their coffee in silence. Then Sarah asked the question Jack had been dreading. Why was Volkov in Colorado? How did he know you'd be there? Jack had spent the weekend asking himself the same question. The only answer that made sense was one he didn't want to believe. He came for me. Specifically for me. That ambush wasn't random. It was bait. He knew I was living near Black Ridge. Knew Hawk would call me if SEALs got in trouble. Knew I'd come. But why, after 30 years? Jack pulled a folded paper from his pocket. Intelligence report Hawk had given him Sunday night. He handed it to Sarah. She read quickly, her expression darkening. Nikolai Volkov, age 68, former Soviet Spetsnaz, war criminal, arms dealer, currently dying of pancreatic cancer, estimated 6 months to live. Sarah looked up. He's dying. He came here to settle scores before he dies. And I'm the score that matters most. I'm the man who shot him, who almost killed him, who left him with a scar he's carried for 30 years. Jack took the paper back. According to intel, he's been asking questions about me for months. My retirement, my location, my capabilities. He planned this. Then we need protection, security. Already arranged. Hawk's got extra patrols. But Volkov's not stupid. He won't come at me directly. He'll use proxies, ambushes, the kind of asymmetric warfare he taught the Mujahideen. Sarah processed this. So what do we do? Jack looked at the mountains. At the valley where men trained to kill at distance. At the future standing beside him in the form of a 28-year-old woman who'd made a shot he couldn't make. We train harder. We prepare better. And when he comes again, and he will come again, we're ready. The afternoon session focused on advanced ballistics. Jack stood at a whiteboard covered in equations that looked like calculus had a baby with physics and abandoned it in a snowstorm. Long-range shooting isn't point and shoot. It's applied mathematics under stress. Every shot requires calculating multiple variables simultaneously. Distance, wind, temperature, humidity, barometric pressure, angle of inclination, Coriolis effect from Earth's rotation, spin drift from bullet rotation, and you've got maybe 10 seconds to do math that would take a civilian 5 minutes with a calculator. Morrison raised his hand. Master Chief, can't we just use ballistic computers? They do all this automatically. Jack's expression was patient. Technology fails, son. Batteries die, software glitches. Electronics get wet or cold or shot. But your brain works until you're dead. And even then, it keeps working for a few seconds. So yeah, use the computer when you want it. But know how to do the math by hand, because someday your life will depend on it. He walked them through a sample calculation. Target at 3,000 meters. Wind 15 knots. Temperature 30 degrees Fahrenheit. Shooting uphill at 20-degree angle. Start with basic ballistics. A .408 Chaytak round leaves the barrel at 3,000 feet per second. Gravity pulls it down at 32 feet per second squared. Time of flight to 3,000 meters is approximately 6.8 seconds. In that time, the bullet drops roughly 200 feet. So you need to aim 200 feet high. But that's just gravity. He wrote more numbers. Wind at 15 knots is roughly 17.2 miles per hour, or 25 feet per second. In 6.8 seconds of flight time, wind pushes the bullet roughly 170 feet sideways. So you need to aim 170 feet into the wind. But wait, there's more. Temperature affects air density. Warmer air is less dense, less drag. Bullet flies farther. At 30 degrees, you need to add roughly 3% to your elevation calculation. And shooting uphill, gravity affects the bullet differently. You need to subtract the cosine of your angle from your elevation hold. 20-degree angle means you multiply your elevation hold by 0.94. By now, half the class looked lost. Sarah was scribbling notes furiously. Reeves had his eyes closed, trying to memorize. Morrison looked like he was regretting every life choice that led to this moment. Jack smiled grimly. And that's the simple version. I'm not even getting into Coriolis effect, spin drift, or atmospheric pressure changes. Point is, long-range shooting is hard. Really hard. It takes thousands of rounds and years of practice to develop the intuition to do this math subconsciously. But that's what I'm here to teach you. For the next 2 hours, they worked problems. Jack called out scenarios. Students calculated solutions. He corrected errors with patience that surprised everyone, including himself. Maybe teaching really was his calling. Maybe this was what the last 40 years had been preparation for. Sarah excelled at the mathematics. Her background, she explained during a break, included an engineering degree before joining the Navy. The numbers came naturally to her. What she lacked was the experiential component, the instinct born from actually shooting in those conditions. The intuition will come, Jack told her. You can't teach it directly. It develops through repetition, through making shots and missing shots and learning to feel the difference. Give it time. How much time did it take you? Jack thought back to his early days, to the thousands of hours on ranges, to the hundreds of shots in combat, to the slow accumulation of knowledge that couldn't be rushed. 10 years before I felt truly competent, 20 before I felt confident, 40 before I realized how much I still didn't know. Sarah looked discouraged. I don't have 40 years. You don't need 40. You've got modern equipment I didn't have. Better rifles, better scopes, better ammunition. And you've got me. Learn from my mistakes and you'll progress faster than I did. What if I make new mistakes? Then you'll learn from those too. Jack paused. Mistakes are how we learn, Lieutenant. The trick is making sure your mistakes don't kill you or the people depending on you. They broke for the day at 1700. Jack was exhausted. Teaching used different muscles than doing. Mental muscles he hadn't exercised in years. But it was good exhaustion, the kind that came from productive work rather than empty routine. He was packing his gear when Hawk approached. How'd they do? Sarah's exceptional. Reeves is solid. Morrison needs attitude adjustment. The others have potential. Give me 3 months and I'll have them ready for anything short of miracle shots. Hawk's expression went serious. I need to talk to you about Volkov. We got confirmation from forensics. Body we pulled from that valley? Not him. Jack froze. What? Hawk pulled out a tablet showing autopsy photos. This man was mid-50s, Slavic features, similar build to Volkov. But dental records don't match. DNA doesn't match. He was a double, a decoy, which means Volkov is still alive and still coming for you. Hawk's voice was grim. This whole thing was a test. He wanted to see if you'd take the shot, how you'd react, what capabilities we have. Now he knows. Jack felt ice in his stomach, the professional hitman's instinct that had kept him alive through 4 decades of close calls. Volkov hadn't been trying to kill him yesterday. Volkov had been gathering intelligence, learning his enemy's weaknesses. He knows I froze. He knows you passed the rifle to someone else, which tells him you're training replacements, building a program. Hawk paused. Jack, this isn't about revenge anymore. This is about eliminating a threat to his operations. You're teaching people to make shots he can't defend against. That makes you a priority target. What are you saying? I'm saying you need protection, full-time security, armored transport, no more living alone in a cabin 15 miles from base. Jack's jaw set. I'm not hiding in a bunker. If Volkov wants me, let him come. Don't be stupid. You're valuable. The knowledge in your head is worth more than your pride. This isn't about pride. Jack's voice was quiet but hard. This is about finishing what I started 30 years ago. Volkov's dying. He's got 6 months. I'm not spending that time looking over my shoulder. I'm spending it training these kids so when Volkov makes his move, they're ready. And if he kills you before you finish training them, then they'll finish the training without me. But they'll do it knowing their teacher didn't run from a fight. Hawk stared at Jack for a long moment, saw the stubborn set of jaw, the old warrior's refusal to compromise on matters of honor. He'd known Jack long enough to recognize when argument was futile. At least take Reeves with you. And Sarah, safety in numbers. Fine, but they follow my lead. Agreed. Hawk paused. Jack, be careful. Volkov's not some insurgent with an AK. He's trained, experienced, dangerous. And he's had 30 years to plan this. So have I. That night, Jack's cabin gained 2 unexpected guests. Senior Chief Reeves and Lieutenant Sarah Chen arrived at 1900 carrying duffel bags and determined expressions. Jack had just finished dinner when headlights swept across his windows. He answered the door with a pistol behind his back. Old habits from too many near misses in too many countries. But seeing his studentess on the porch, he relaxed slightly. What are you doing here? Reeves grinned. Colonel's orders. You get a security detail whether you like it or not. Since you refused base housing, we're moving in. This cabin's got 2 rooms. Then someone's sleeping on the couch. Reeves pushed past Jack into the warmth. Sarah followed, looking apologetic. Sorry, Master Chief. We tried to talk him out of it. No, you didn't. Sarah smiled. No, I didn't. You're a valuable asset, and assets need protection. Jack wanted to argue, wanted to invoke his right to solitude, wanted to point out that he'd survived 40 years without babysitters. But looking at their faces, young and earnest and determined, he recognized a losing battle. Fine, but if you're staying, you follow my rules. Up at 0500, PT at 0530, breakfast at 0630, lights out at 2100, no exceptions. Reeves and Sarah exchanged glances. That's basically boot camp. Welcome to my retirement. They settled in with the efficiency of people accustomed to adapting. Reeves claimed the couch. Sarah took the guest room that doubled as Jack's office. They unpacked weapons, ammunition, and enough gear to withstand a siege. Jack made coffee while they established defensive positions. Windows covered, approach routes identified, escape plans coordinated. It was simultaneously paranoid and professional, but paranoia kept people alive in a world where enemies held grudges for 30 years. Over coffee, Sarah asked the question Jack knew was coming. Master Chief, tell us about David Chen. Jack looked at her, saw genuine curiosity, not morbid fascination. The question deserved an honest answer. David was 35 when he died, Chinese-American, second-generation immigrant. His parents ran a restaurant in San Francisco. He enlisted right out of high school, made SEAL by 23, became one of the best spotters in the teams. Jack paused, remembering. He had this saying, shooters get the glory, but spotters keep them alive. He was right. A good spotter is worth 3 good shooters. What made him good? Patience, attention to detail, and an almost supernatural ability to read terrain. He could look at a valley and tell you where every enemy position was, which routes offered the best approaches, where the ambushes would come from. Saved our lives more times than I can count. Reeves leaned forward. Sir, I have to ask, Lieutenant Chen here, Sarah Chen. David Chen, that can't be coincidence. Jack had wondered about that. The same last name, the same dedication to precision, the same way she tilted her head when concentrating. But Chen was a common name. Millions of people shared it. Sarah's expression had gone strange, careful, like someone walking on ice that might crack. Master Chief, what was David Chen's first name? His full name? David Michael Chen. Why? Sarah set down her coffee cup with hands that trembled slightly. Because that was my father's name, David Michael Chen. Born San Francisco, 1954. Parents owned a Chen's Garden restaurant on Grand Avenue. Enlisted Navy, 1972. Made SEAL, 1977. The cabin went silent. Outside, wind whispered through pine trees. Inside, 3 people processed information that changed everything. Jack's mind raced through memories. David Chen dying in snow. But before that, David Chen living, talking about his family back home, his wife, his daughter, a girl he'd named Sarah, Jack whispered. He named you Sarah, after his grandmother. Sarah's voice was steady, but her eyes were wet. My mother remarried when I was 8. I took her new husband's last name. But my birth name was Sarah Chen, daughter of David Michael Chen, killed in action, February 1989, Afghanistan. Jack felt the world tilt sideways. The woman he'd been training. The woman who'd saved 6 lives 2 days ago. The woman sitting in his cabin drinking coffee was the daughter of his best friend, the child David had died protecting. Reeves looked between them. Holy shit. Sarah pulled a photograph from her wallet, handed it to Jack. Old photo, colors faded. A young man in seal dress blues holding a tiny baby. David Chen, maybe 28, grinning with pride at the infant cradled in his arms. He sent this to my mother 3 weeks before he died. It's the only picture I have of him holding me. Sarah's voice cracked. I was 6 months old when he deployed, 7 months when he died. I don't remember him at all. Everything I know comes from photos and my mother's stories. Jack stared at the photograph, saw his friend's face, saw joy and love, and the terrible irony of a man holding his daughter while preparing to walk into a valley that would kill him. He remembered David showing him this photo, remembered David saying, "This is what I'm fighting for. This little girl. I want her to grow up in a world where monsters like Volkov don't exist." And now that little girl was grown, was a SEAL, was a sniper, was sitting in Jack's cabin because fate or destiny or cosmic irony had brought them together 30 years after her father's death. "Did you know?" Jack asked. "When you volunteered for this training, did you know I was David Chen's team leader?" Sarah nodded slowly. "I knew. I've known for years. When I joined the Navy, I requested my father's service record. Most of it was redacted, but I found the after-action report from Operation Frozen Dagger. Your name was in it, Master Chief Jack McCallister. Team leader, I've been following your career ever since. Why didn't you tell me?" "Because I wanted you to judge me on my skills, not my lineage. I didn't want special treatment. I didn't want you training me differently because you felt obligated to my father's memory." Jack understood that, respected it even, but it didn't make the revelation any less overwhelming. "Your father was the best man I ever served with, the best friend I ever had. When he died, I promised myself I'd finish what we started. I'd kill Volkov. I'd make sure David's sacrifice meant something." Jack looked at Sarah. "I failed. I missed the shot. And I've spent 30 years wondering if David's death was my fault." Sarah's voice was fierce. "My father chose to be there, chose to serve, chose to protect his teammates. His death wasn't your fault. It was war. It was probability. It was 1,000 variables beyond anyone's control. I pulled the trigger. And you came within 2 inches of perfect at an impossible distance." Sarah leaned forward. "Master Chief, let me tell you what my mother told me when I joined the SEALs. She said your father died doing exactly what he wanted to do. Protecting people, making a difference, living according to his values. She said if she could bring him back, but it meant he'd spent his life safe and comfortable and unfulfilled, she wouldn't do it. Because that wouldn't be the man she loved." Jack felt something break inside him. Some wall he'd been holding up for 30 years. Some barrier between grief and acceptance. He'd been carrying David Chen's death like a stone. But maybe David's daughter was right. Maybe honor and sacrifice and death in service to others was its own form of immortality. "He would be proud of you," Jack said quietly. "Your father. If he could see what you've become, the shot you made, the warrior you are, he'd be so damn proud." Sarah wiped her eyes. "Thank you. That means more than you know." They sat in silence for a long moment. 3 warriors bound by blood and bullets and the strange mathematics of fate. Outside, the mountain night pressed close. Inside, old wounds began to heal. Reeves cleared his throat. "Sir, I have a question. Probably the wrong time, but I need to ask." Jack nodded permission. "You said you missed Volkov by 2 inches, but you had a world-class spotter in David Chen. How did both of you miscalculate win by that much?" It was the question Jack had asked himself 10,000 times. The calculation that haunted his dreams. He'd gone over the math repeatedly. The wind flags, the mirage, every input had been correct. So why had the bullet drifted those crucial 2 inches? "I don't know. We did everything right. The data was solid. The execution was perfect. But something pushed that bullet right when it should have gone straight." "Could Volkov have known you were there?" Reeves asked. "Could he have set up a trap even then?" Jack started to dismiss the idea, then stopped. Thought about Volkov's resources, his experience, his 30 years of planning revenge. What if the ambush in Colorado wasn't the first trap? What if 1989 had been a trap too? If he knew, why not just kill us all immediately? Because killing you fast doesn't satisfy revenge. Reeves was warming to his theory. He's dying now. Terminal cancer. He's got nothing to lose. But 30 years ago, he was young, healthy, had a career ahead of him. Maybe he wanted you to suffer, wanted you to live with guilt, wanted you to know you'd failed. Sarah picked up the thread. So he lets you take the shot, knows you're good enough to come close. But he's set up mortars pre-sighted on likely sniper positions. When you fire, the muzzle flash gives away your location. Mortars drop. Team gets killed. You survive to carry the guilt. Jack felt ice water in his veins because it made terrible sense. Volkov had always been brilliant at psychological warfare, at breaking enemies mentally rather than physically. What better revenge than letting Jack live while everyone around him died? But we can't prove it, Jack said. It's just speculation. Reeves smiled grimly. Then let's ask him. When he comes for you, and he will come, we ask him before we kill him. The next morning, training intensified. Jack pushed his students harder, demanding excellence that bordered on perfection. They shot in snow, in wind, in conditions that made them curse and complain and question why they'd volunteered for this. Because Volkov's coming, Jack told them. And when he does, I want you ready for anything. Sarah excelled under pressure. The revelation about her father seemed to have freed something in her. She shot with confidence born not just from skill, but from purpose. She was honoring David Chen's memory with every round fired. Morrison improved rapidly once his ego stopped interfering with his learning. Reeves became more instinctive, trusting feel over calculation. Mendez found his confidence. Foster developed his instinct. By week's end, Jack had them shooting targets at 2,500 meters with 80% accuracy. It was remarkable progress, but it wasn't enough. You're thinking two-dimensional, Jack told them Friday afternoon. You're thinking target at distance, calculate, hold, shoot. But real sniping is four-dimensional. Distance, elevation, time, and probability. You're not just hitting where the target is, you're hitting where the target will be when your bullet arrives. He set up a demonstration, placed a target on a sled, had a ranger tow it across the range at 15 miles per hour, distance 1,800 meters. Morrison, you're up. Hit the moving target. Morrison calculated, aimed, fired, missed by 10 feet. You aimed where it was, not where it would be. Calculate lead time. Bullet takes 2.4 seconds to arrive. Target's moving 22 feet per second. That's 53 feet of travel. Aim 53 feet ahead. Morrison tried again. Missed by 3 feet. Better. But you're not accounting for target angular velocity because the target's moving perpendicular to your line of sight. Apparent speed changes with distance. You need to adjust your lead based on angle. It took Morrison 20 rounds before he connected. When he did, his whoop of victory echoed across the valley. That's one hit out of 21 tries, Jack said. In combat, you get one shot, maybe two if you're lucky. 20 misses means 20 dead teammates. So let's work on improving that ratio. They practiced moving targets all afternoon. By end of day, everyone had connected at least once. Sarah had connected 5 times out of 12. She was developing the instinct faster than seemed possible. After training, Jack pulled her aside. You're ready for advanced instruction. Already? I've only been training a week. You've got natural talent and your father's instincts, plus motivation most shooters lack. Jack paused. Tomorrow, you and I are going to the extreme range. We're going to see how far you can really shoot. Sarah's eyes lit up. 4,000 meters? 6,000. Her jaw dropped. Master Chief, that's over 3.5 miles. That's impossible. That's what they said about 3,000. Then about 4,000. Every generation pushes the boundaries. Your generation is going to push further. Jack smiled slightly. Besides, if Volkov comes at extreme distance, I want you able to engage. What if I can't make shots that far? Then we find your limit and work to extend it. But I think you're going to surprise yourself. That night, Sarah couldn't sleep. She lay in the guest room staring at ceiling, mind racing. Tomorrow she'd attempt shots her father never dreamed of. Tomorrow she'd test limits that terrified and excited her in equal measure. A soft knock on her door. Jack's voice, quiet. Can't sleep either? No, Master Chief. Put on some coffee. Let's talk. They sat at Jack's kitchen table, 2 warriors separated by 3 decades, united by loss and purpose. The coffee was strong, the conversation is stronger. Tell me about him, Sarah said. Not the operator. The man. What was David Chen like when he wasn't being a SEAL? Jack smiled, remembering. He loved old movies. Film noir, Bogart and Bacall. Used to quote Casablanca constantly. Drove everyone crazy. He paused. He played guitar. Not well, but enthusiastically. And he made the worst jokes, puns that made you groan. But he'd laugh so hard at his own jokes that eventually everyone else would laugh too. Sarah was crying and smiling simultaneously. My mother said he sang to me, bad lullabies he made up on the spot. That sounds like David. Jack's voice was soft. He talked about you constantly, showed everyone your picture, made elaborate plans for your future, college fund, teaching you to shoot, taking you camping in the Sierras. He had it all mapped out. He didn't get to do any of it, no, but he died making sure you'd grow up in a safer world. That was his choice, his sacrifice. And judging by who you've become, he succeeded. They sat in silence, mourning a man one had loved as a friend, the other had never known as a father. Outside, stars wheeled in ancient patterns. Inside, two people found comfort in shared grief. Finally, Sarah asked the question that had haunted her for 29 years. Did he suffer when he died? Was it quick? Jack had dreaded this question, had prepared for it. But preparation didn't make truth easier to speak. He died protecting me. When the mortar started falling, David pushed me into a depression in the ground, covered me with his body. He took the shrapnel that would have killed me. Jack's voice broke. It wasn't instant. He had maybe 90 seconds, but he wasn't in pain. Shock had kicked in. He just kept saying, "Get home, Jack. Tell Sarah I loved her. Tell her daddy loved her so much." Sarah was sobbing now. Jack reached across the table, took her hand, let her cry. Some grief couldn't be contained, could only be released. When she finally composed herself, Sarah asked, "Did you tell me he loved me?" "I tried. I wrote your mother a letter. Sent it a month after we got back. But I never heard from her. I assumed she didn't want contact with anyone who'd been there, who reminded her of what she'd lost. She remarried," Sarah said. "Moved to Seattle, changed our names. I think she was trying to start over. Trying to give me a normal childhood without the shadow of military life." "Did it work?" Sarah smiled through tears. "I'm here, aren't I? Wearing my father's uniform, carrying on his legacy. I'd say it didn't work at all." They talked until dawn, two warriors keeping vigil over memories. When the sun finally rose over mountains, they'd forged a bond deeper than instructor and student. They'd become family, the only family each had left that understood the weight of honoring the dead by living with purpose. Saturday morning broke clear and cold, perfect conditions for pushing boundaries. Jack drove Sarah and Reeves to a remote valley where distances could stretch to ridiculous lengths. They set up at an elevated position overlooking terrain that dropped away into vast emptiness. Jack had prepared targets at various distances, 3,000 meters, 4,000, 5,000, and almost invisible in the distance, a full-size silhouette at 6,000 meters. "We'll work our way up," Jack explained. "Build confidence, build understanding. Each distance teaches something new about ballistics and atmospherics. By the time we reach 6,000, you'll understand what's possible." They started at 3,000. Sarah made the shot on her second try. At 4,000, she needed 5 attempts but connected solidly. At 5,000, the challenge intensified. Distance became so great that even through the scope, target identification was nearly impossible. "You're shooting at an idea more than a target," Jack explained. "You know roughly where it is. You've calculated where your bullet should go, but you can't see impact until your spotter confirms. It requires absolute trust in your data." Sarah fired 15 rounds at 5,000 meters, connected twice, 2,300 and change. Not enough to rely on in combat, but enough to prove possibility. Then they moved to 6,000 meters. The target was barely visible, even with magnification. A tiny shape at the limits of optical resolution. Time of flight would be nearly 12 seconds. Wind drift could exceed 300 feet. The bullet would drop over 400 feet from bore line to impact. "This is theoretical," Jack said. "I've never successfully engaged at this distance in combat. I've hit steel targets at 6,000 meters exactly twice in 40 years. Both times under perfect conditions. Today, conditions are good but not perfect. I'd say you have maybe a 5% chance of connecting. So why try? Because someone will make this shot eventually. Military technology advances, equipment improves. Human skill develops. In 10 years, 6,000-meter shots might be routine, but someone has to be first. Jack looked at Sarah. Why not you? Sarah settled behind the rifle. Jack fed her data. Wind, temperature, atmospheric pressure, elevation hold, windage hold, 290 feet up, 310 feet left. Aim at empty sky and trust mathematics to bring bullet and target together. She fired. They waited. 12 seconds felt like 12 minutes. Finally, Reeves on the spotting scope. Miss, left and low, approximately 30 feet. Sarah adjusted. Fired again. Miss, right and high. Third shot. Miss, but closer. Fourth shot. Miss. Fifth shot. Jack watched through his own scope, saw the impossible happen, saw the target at 6,000 meters shudder from impact, saw proof that human capability could stretch further than anyone believed possible. Hit, Reeves was shouting. Holy shit, that's a hit. 6,000 meters. That's got to be a record. Jack felt pride swell in his chest. The student surpassing the teacher. The next generation reaching further. David Chen's daughter achieving what her father never lived to attempt. Sarah turned to Jack, face split by a grin, eyes shining with tears and triumph. I did it. For my father, I did it. No, Jack said quietly. You did it for yourself. Your father gave you the foundation. But this shot, this is yours. Own it. They packed up in silence that was comfortable rather than awkward. Drove back to base through mountains that had witnessed history. A new record. A new boundary pushed. A new generation proving that impossible was just a challenge waiting to be conquered. Back at Black Ridge, news had already spread. Someone had been watching through long-range optics, had confirmed the shot. By the time they arrived, half the base was waiting to congratulate Sarah. Hawk pulled Jack aside. 6,000 meters. That's extraordinary. She's extraordinary. Give her another year and she'll be better than I ever was. That's the idea, isn't it? Hawk smiled. Train your replacement. Pass the torch. Make yourself obsolete. Jack watched Sarah accepting congratulations with grace and humility. Saw in her everything he'd hoped to be at her age. Everything David Chen had died to protect. Yeah, Jack said, that's exactly the idea. But the celebration was cut short by news that chilled everyone. Hawk's face went grim as he read a message on his radio. He pulled Jack and Sarah into his office, closed the door. We've got a problem. Intelligence intercept from NSA. Volkov's not just planning to hit you, Jack. He's planning to hit the base. Full assault. He's assembled a team of former Spetsnaz operators. 40 men, heavy weapons. They're moving toward Black Ridge now. ETA 72 hours. The cabin's evening turned cold, with more than winter chill. Jack sat at his table, surrounded by maps and intelligence reports. Sarah and Reeves studied the data with growing concern. Volkov wasn't coming alone. Wasn't coming subtle. He was bringing an army. 40 men, Reeves said. That's a full strike force. We've only got maybe 80 personnel on base. Most of them support staff. This is going to be a bloodbath. Not if we prepare, Jack said. We've got 3 days. We know the terrain. We choose the battlefield. We make them come to us on our terms. Sarah looked at the maps. Master Chief, even with advantages, 40 trained operators is overwhelming force. We need backup. Reinforcements from other bases. Jack shook his head. By the time reinforcements arrive, it'll be over. We work with what we have. He traced lines on the map. Volkov will approach from the east. The terrain funnels into 3 possible routes. We set up overlapping fields of fire, turn their numbers into a disadvantage. You're talking about a last stand. I'm talking about making them pay for every foot of ground. Jack's voice was hard. Volkov's dying. He's got nothing to lose. But his men? They're mercenaries. They're fighting for money, not ideology. Make it expensive enough and they'll break. The 3 of them worked through the night, planning defensive positions, calculating fields of fire, preparing for a battle that would test everything Jack had taught. By dawn, they had a plan. Risky, brutal, but possible. And in 72 hours, they'd learn if possibility was enough. Jack stood on his porch watching sunrise paint mountains gold and red. Somewhere out there, Nikolai Volkov was coming. Coming to finish what started 30 years ago. Coming to settle a score written in blood and snow and 2 inches of miscalculation. But Jack wasn't the same man he'd been 30 years ago. Wasn't alone, wasn't unsure. He had allies, students, David Chen's daughter standing beside him. And this time when the shooting started, he wouldn't freeze. This time he'd be ready. The sun climbed higher, burning off morning mist. A new day, perhaps one of his last. But Jack McCallister had spent 40 years preparing for this moment, had trained a generation of warriors to carry on his work, had made peace with ghosts that haunted him. Now he was ready to add one more ghost to the mountain. Volkov's ghost, the specter that had defined 3 decades of guilt. And when that ghost finally laid down, maybe Jack could rest too. But not yet. First came the storm, first came the battle, first came the test of everything he'd taught and learned and become. The mountains waited. The enemy approached, and an old warrior prepared for one last stand that would define his legacy. 3 days, 72 hours. Then the shooting would start. And when it ended, either Jack McCallister would finally have peace, or he'd have the honor of dying in defense of everything he'd spent his life protecting. Either way, he was ready. The mountains didn't care. They never did. They just stood witness to human drama playing out in their shadows. Eternal, patient, indifferent to the small wars waged by creatures whose lives flickered like candles in the wind. But this candle wasn't done burning, not yet. There was light left, purpose left, work left unfinished, and Jack McCallister intended to see it through to whatever end awaited. Behind him, Sarah and Reeves emerged from the cabin, ready for another day of training, another day preparation, another day closer to the reckoning that loomed like storm clouds on the horizon. Jack turned to face them, saw determination in their eyes, saw courage born not from ignorance of danger, but from acceptance of it, saw the future standing ready to defend itself. "Let's get to work," he said. "We've got 72 hours to prepare for war." And in the distance, too far to hear, Nikolai Volkov smiled. The prey had become aware. The trap was set. Soon, very soon, accounts would be settled. Debts would be paid. In one way or another, the long war that began in Afghan snow 3 decades ago would finally end. The mountains watched, waited, and in their ancient silence prepared to host one more battle in the endless human struggle to prove that honor and courage and sacrifice meant something in a universe that offered no guarantees. 3 days. The countdown had begun. 72 hours to prepare for war. Jack McCallister had fought in enough battles to know that time was both ally and enemy. Too little time meant inadequate preparation. Too much time meant soldiers had space to imagine all the ways they could die. 72 hours was exactly wrong. Just enough to understand the danger. Not enough to properly address it. He stood in the Black Ridge Command Center at 100 Monday morning, studying topographical maps with the intensity of a man reading his own death warrant. Colonel Hawk Harrison stood beside him, along with Sarah Chen, Daniel Reeves, and every combat-capable officer on base. 23 people in total, against 40 trained killers with nothing to lose. The mathematics were brutal. Hawk pointed to satellite imagery showing terrain east of Black Ridge, 3 valleys converging on the base like fingers reaching for a throat. Volkov will approach from here. The eastern approaches offer the only vehicle access within 10 kilometers. He'll need trucks to haul weapons and supplies. That limits his routes. Jack traced the valleys with a finger scarred by 40 years of trigger work. Valley 1 is too exposed. Open terrain for the last 2 clicks. We'd see them coming with enough time to call in air support. Valley 2 has good cover, but bad egress. If they get pinned, they're trapped. Valley 3, he tapped the map. This is where I'd come. Forest covered to within 800 meters. Multiple escape routes. All right, awesome routes. High ground for overwatch positions. So we prepare for Valley 3, Reeves said. We prepare for all 3, but we concentrate forces at Valley 3. Jack pulled out a grease pencil and began marking positions. Observation posts here and here. Main defensive line here. Fallback positions here. Sniper hides at these elevations. We layer defenses so every approach is covered by at least 2 positions. Sarah studied the map with the analytical precision she'd inherited from her father. Master Chief, if they come with 40 men, they can split forces. Hit us from multiple directions simultaneously. Divide our attention. That's what I'd do, Jack agreed, which is why we don't spread out. We concentrate at our strongest point and make them come to us. Turn their numbers into a disadvantage. How? Morrison asked. 40 against 23. Those odds don't improve with terrain. Jack's smile was cold. Ever heard of the Battle of Thermopylae? The Spartans, Mendez said. 300 against thousands. 300 trained warriors against untrained masses. And they held for 3 days because terrain neutralized numerical advantage. Jack pointed to a narrow section of Valley 3. This bottleneck is our Thermopylae, only 50 meters wide, steep sides, no flanking roads. They want to reach us. They come through here, and when they do, we kill them. The room went quiet. Jack's tone carried absolute certainty, the voice of a man who'd planned ambushes on 6 continents and survived them all. Hawk cleared his throat. We need to account for their heavy weapons. Intelligence says Volkov's team has heavy machine guns, possibly mortars. They can sit back and pound us from distance. Not if they can't see us. Jack marked more positions. We dig in, reinforce positions with sandbags and timber. Create overhead cover against indirect fire. Make ourselves hard targets. And if they bypass us entirely? Sarah asked. Come straight for the base. Then we failed. Jack met her eyes. But they won't bypass us. Volkov didn't come all this way to attack an empty base. He came for me, personally. He'll come through that valley because he knows I'll be there. This isn't about destroying Black Ridge. It's about revenge. The word hung in the air like cordite smoke. Revenge. The oldest motive for warfare. The reason men killed each other across centuries and continents. Personal, primal, unstoppable. All right, Hawk said. We have 71 hours. Let's make them count. Morrison, Mendez, Foster, you're on construction detail. Get out to that bottleneck and start building fighting positions. Reeves, coordinate with base engineers. I want obstacles in that valley. Wire, mines, anything that slows them down. Sarah, Jack, you're on overwatch planning. Figure out where your shooters need to be to maximize coverage. And me? Asked a voice from the back. Tommy Martinez, 58 years old, combat medic, the only other survivor from that day 30 years ago when everything went wrong. Hawk's voice softened. Doc, you're our senior medic. Start prepping the aid station. Stockpile supplies, blood, bandages, morphine, everything we might need. Tommy nodded. His face carried the weight of too many casualties patched together with hope and prayer. How many wounded you expecting? All of us, Jack said quietly. If we survive this, we'll all be carrying something home. The next 12 hours blurred into organized chaos. Jack moved between the command center, the armory, and the valley bottleneck, coordinating defense with the methodical precision that had kept him alive through 4 decades. Every position was checked twice, every field of fire calculated, every fallback route rehearsed. At the bottleneck, engineers worked with desperate efficiency. Bulldozers carved fighting positions into hillsides. Sandbags stacked 8 feet high created blast walls. Overhead cover went up using timber and earth. Concertina wires stretched across the valley floor. Claymore mines positioned every 10 meters, remote detonators running back to the main position. It was brutal, primitive warfare. No high-tech solutions, no drone strikes, just dirt and steel, and men willing to hold ground against overwhelming odds. Sarah worked alongside Jack, her engineering background proving invaluable. She calculated angles and distances with the same precision she applied to long-range shooting. Established sniper positions at 3,000, 4,000, and 5,000 meters from the bottleneck. Created layered defenses so each position supported the others. By evening, the valley had transformed into a killing ground. But Jack knew killing grounds cut both ways. Good men would die here alongside bad. The only question was who'd run out of bodies first. He sat on a sandbag barrier as sunset painted mountains blood red. Sarah joined him, carrying 2 cups of coffee that had gone lukewarm in the cold air. Reminds you of something, doesn't it? Jack knew what she meant. Afghanistan, 1989. Another valley, another defensive position, another countdown to violence that would leave some men standing and others bleeding into snow. Your father and I sat exactly like this the night before the operation. Drinking bad coffee, watching sunset. Not talking about what might happen because talking about it made it real. Were you scared? Jack considered lying, decided Sarah deserved truth. Terrified. I was 32, felt invincible. But deep down, I knew every operation could be the last. Fear kept me sharp, kept me alive. Sarah sipped coffee, grimacing at the temperature. I'm scared now. Not of dying, of failing, of letting down everyone depending on me. That's the burden of competence. People see what you can do and they rely on it, but here's what I learned. You can't carry everyone. You can only do your job and trust others to do theirs. What if my job isn't enough? Then we adapt, survive, overcome. That's what warriors do. Jack looked at her. Your father taught me something the night before he died. He said the mark of a true professional isn't never being scared. It's being scared and doing the job anyway. Sarah smiled despite the weight pressing down. He sounds like he was wise. He was young, 28 when I met him, but he had this old soul quality, like he'd lived before and remembered the important lessons. Jack paused. He'd be proud of you, Sarah. Not just your shooting, who you've become. The warrior, the woman. Thank you. That means everything. They sat in companionable silence as darkness claimed the valley. Around them, men prepared for battle with the timeless rituals warriors had practiced since the first human picked up a rock and decided some things were worth dying for. Checking weapons, writing letters, making peace with whatever gods or philosophies they carried. Jack thought about his own gods. Elizabeth dead 5 years, James dead 20, David Chen dead 30, ghosts who waited patiently for him to join them. Maybe tomorrow, maybe in 70 hours, maybe he'd finally get to apologize in person for being the one who survived. Master Chief, Sarah's voice cut through his thoughts. Can I ask you something? Always. If you could go back to 1989 knowing what you know now, would you take the shot? The question Jack had asked himself 10,000 times. The calculation that haunted every quiet moment, and for the first time in 30 years, he had an answer that felt true. Yes, because not taking it means Volkov continues operating, continues killing, continues spreading violence across the world. Maybe I miss. Maybe 8 good men die. But maybe I hit and countless others are spared. The math is brutal, but the logic is sound. Even knowing the cost, especially knowing the kid, because the cost of inaction is higher. Jack met her eyes. War isn't about avoiding casualties. It's about ensuring casualties serve a purpose. Your father's death, tragic as it was, meant something. He died protecting his team, protecting you, protecting a future he never got to see. That's not failure. That's the highest form of service. Sarah wiped her eyes. I wish I'd known him. You do know him. You carry him with you, in your skill, your dedication, your willingness to stand between evil and innocence. David Chen lives in every shot you take, every life you protect. That's a kind of immortality worth having. The night deepened. Stars emerged in crystalline clarity that only came at altitude. Jack and Sarah eventually returned to the command center where Hawk was coordinating with regional command. The conversation was tense. I need air support, Hawk said into the radio. Close air support. Apache gunships, A-10 Warthogs, something. The voice on the other end was apologetic but firm. Negative Viper 6, all available air assets are committed to operations in the Middle East. Earliest we can provide air cover is 72 hours. That's when we're being attacked. Understood. We'll have birds in the air as soon as possible, but you need to hold until they arrive. And if we can't hold, then minimize casualties and fall back to secondary positions. Do not, repeat, do not allow classified materials to fall into enemy hands. Destroy them if necessary. Hawk's jaw tightened. Understood. Viper 6 out. He threw the radio handset down with barely controlled fury. They're abandoning us. Jack shook his head. They're making the same calculations we are. Assets versus priorities. We're not strategic. We're tactical. A training base in the middle of nowhere. Losing us doesn't change the war. That's supposed to make me feel better? It's supposed to make you realistic. We're on our own. We knew that going in, so we adapt to a reality and find a way to win anyway. Hawk took a breath, centering himself. You're right, okay. New plan. We hold them until air support arrives. 72 hours. 3 days. We can do 3 days. Jack didn't mention that 3 days meant 72 hours of continuous combat. Meant fighting exhausted and wounded against a rotating enemy force. Meant watching friends die and knowing you couldn't save them. Hawk knew all that. Saying it aloud changed nothing. Instead, Jack pulled out his data book, the worn leather journal containing 40 years of accumulated knowledge. He opened to a blank page and began writing. Not calculations or distances or wind values, something different. Sarah watched over his shoulder. What are you writing? Instructions for whoever finds this. How to continue training if I'm not here to finish it. Techniques, lessons, everything I haven't had time to teach. You're not going to die, Master Chief. Maybe not, but planning for failure is how you prevent it. Jack continued writing. When I'm done with this, I want you to take it. Keep it safe. If I don't make it through the next 3 days, you finish what I started. Train the next generation. pass on the knowledge. Sarah's voice was thick. I'm not ready for that responsibility. Neither was I at your age. But responsibility doesn't wait for readiness. It just arrives and you either rise to meet it or you don't. Jack looked up from the journal. You'll rise. I know because your father did, and you're his daughter in every way that matters. The night wore on, plans solidified, positions finalized, equipment distributed. By 0300, everything that could be done had been done. Now came the hardest part, waiting. Jack returned to his cabin for what might be the last time. Reeves and Sarah came with him, their presence both comfort and reminder that he was no longer alone. The cabin felt different, knowing he might never see it again. Every object carried new weight. The coffee maker, the photographs on the mantel, the chair by the fireplace. He stood before the photographs of his sons. James in marine dress blues, frozen forever at 26. Michael in combat gear, still fighting somewhere far away. And behind them, the group photo from Afghanistan. 10 men who believed themselves invincible. 8 red circles marking those who learned otherwise. Jack pulled a marker from his pocket, hesitated, then drew a 9th red circle around his own face. Because in a way, he died that day too. The man he'd been, confident and certain and unburdened by guilt, had perished alongside David Chen. What survived was something different, something harder and sadder and more aware of mortality's proximity. What are you doing? Sarah asked quietly. Making peace. Jack capped the marker. I've been carrying 8 ghosts for 30 years. Time to acknowledge I've been a ghost too. Walking, breathing, but not really alive. And now I get to choose. Die as a ghost or live as a man. Jack turned to face her. Thank you, Sarah, for giving me that choice. For showing me there's still work worth doing. Purpose worth serving. You gave me that first, Master Chief. You taught me I could honor my father by being the warrior he never got to see me become. They stood in the cabin's quiet, surrounded by memories and possibilities. Outside, the mountain night pressed close. Inside, 2 warriors found strength and shared purpose. Reeves cleared his throat from the doorway. Sorry to interrupt, but Hawk just got new intelligence. Volkov's team is moving faster than expected. They'll be here in 48 hours, not 72. Jack processed this. 24 hours lost. 24 hours of preparation time evaporated. The enemy adapting, pressing advantage, refusing to let defenders settle into comfort. Then we work through the night. No sleep, no rest. We use every minute we have left. They returned to the valley as dawn broke over mountains. The transformation since yesterday was remarkable. What had been a natural passage now resembled a fortress. Fighting positions dug deep, obstacles layered thick, every meter of ground contested. But Jack saw weaknesses, gaps in coverage, positions vulnerable to flanking, problems that needed solving before 40 trained killers arrived to exploit them. He worked with manic intensity, driven by the clock ticking down in his head. 48 hours, 2 days, 48 hours to turn good defenses into great ones, to prepare men for combat most had never experienced, to steel himself for a confrontation 30 years in the making. At noon, Hawk pulled him aside. You need to sleep, Jack. You're running on empty. Sleep when I'm dead. That might be sooner than you think if you're too exhausted to shoot straight. Jack knew Hawk was right, but sleep meant dreams. Dreams meant Afghanistan. Dreams meant watching David Chen die over and over in slow motion, while his own voice screamed calculations that came 2 inches short of salvation. I'll sleep after we finish the North Barrier. Hawk sighed but didn't argue. He'd commanded men long enough to recognize when pushing was counterproductive. Some warriors needed to work themselves to exhaustion before they could rest. Jack was one of them. By evening, the North Barrier was complete. 3 layers of concertina wire. Firing positions covering every approach. Mines positioned to channel attackers into kill zones. It was as ready as human effort could make it. Jack finally allowed himself to return to base. Found a cot in a storage room. Lay down fully clothed, rifle within arm's reach, pistol under his pillow. Closed his eyes expecting nightmares. Instead, he dreamed of Elizabeth, his wife dead 5 years, alive and smiling in their kitchen. Sunlight streaming through windows, coffee brewing. Normal life from a time before loss became his constant companion. In the dream, she spoke. You've been carrying too much, Jack. It's time to put some of it down. I can't. I owe them. You owe them nothing but to live well, to honor their memory by being fully alive. Not this half existence you've been trapped in. I don't know how. Yes, you do. You're teaching it to Sarah. Purpose, legacy, passing wisdom to the next generation. That's how we cheat death, Jack. Not by living forever, but by ensuring what we learn doesn't die with us. He woke with tears on his face. The dream had felt more real than waking, more true than anything he'd experienced in years. Elizabeth's voice still echoed in his mind. Live well. Honor their memory by being fully alive. Maybe she was right. Maybe 30 years of guilt had been enough. Maybe it was time to lay down the stone he'd been carrying and walk forward unburdened. Or maybe he had 48 hours left to live, and his subconscious was offering comfort in the form of his dead wife's wisdom. Either way, the message was the same. Make these hours count. He found Sarah in the mess hall, studying ballistic charts over cold coffee and a sandwich she wasn't eating. She looked up when he entered, concern evident in her eyes. You look terrible, Master Chief. Feel worse. But I had a dream. Your father was in it, and my wife, and they both said the same thing. Stop carrying the dead. Start living for the living. That's good advice. Easier said than done. Jack poured coffee that was somehow both burnt and weak. But I'm trying. For the first time in 30 years, I'm actually trying. They sat in comfortable silence, two warriors stealing moments of peace before chaos arrived. Outside, the sun set again. Another day gone. Another day closer to the reckoning that loomed like mountains against the horizon. 48 hours became 36. 36 became 24. The countdown continued its inexorable march. Positions were checked and rechecked. Weapons cleaned and tested. Ammunition distributed. Every detail addressed until there was nothing left to do but wait. Jack gathered his shooters at 1800 the night before battle. Sarah, Reeves, Morrison, Mendez, Foster, and 3 others. 9 people who would attempt to hold ground against overwhelming force. 9 people whose skill with rifles would determine whether Black Ridge stood or fell. He looked at their faces. Young, determined, scared but refusing to show it. The same expressions he'd seen on 100 battlefields across 4 decades. The same expression he'd worn at their age, believing skill and courage could overcome any odds. Tomorrow, Volkov comes. Some of you know the history, most don't. Here's what matters. Volkov is good, among the best I've ever faced. He's trained, experienced, ruthless, and he's bringing 40 men just like him. Someone in the back shifted nervously. Jack continued. Your job is simple. Engage targets at maximum range. Make them bleed for every meter. When they close distance, fall back to secondary positions. Make them fight through every prepared obstacle. Attrite their force until air support arrives or they break. And if they don't break, Morrison asked, then we die doing our jobs, protecting each other, protecting this base, protecting everything we've sworn to defend. Jack paused. There's no shame in fear, only in letting fear stop you from doing what's necessary. Tomorrow when the shooting starts, you'll be scared. I'll be scared. We'll all be scared. But fear won't stop us. Clear? Clear, Master Chief. Jack looked at each of them in turn. Good. Get some sleep. Tomorrow's going to be the longest day of your lives. They dispersed to find rest where they could. Sarah lingered, as Jack knew she would. She'd inherited her father's habit of seeking wisdom before battle. What are you thinking about? She asked. Thermopylae, the Spartans who held the pass. History remembers them as heroes. But I wonder if they felt heroic or just tired and scared and determined not to let their brothers down. Probably both. Sarah sat beside him. Master Chief, whatever happens tomorrow, I want you to know you've given me more than shooting skills. You've given me connection to a father I never knew. Purpose beyond just pulling triggers. That's worth more than any record or any medal. Jack felt emotion catch in his throat. Your father would be so proud of who you've become. I hope so. And I hope when this is over, you'll let yourself be proud too, of what you've accomplished, who you've taught, the lives you've saved and will save through the knowledge you've passed on. They sat in darkness lit only by stars. 2 warriors on the eve of battle, 2 people connected by loss and purpose, and the strange alchemy that turns strangers into family. Finally, Jack spoke. Sarah, if I don't make it through tomorrow, I need you to promise me something. Don't talk like that. Promise me you'll finish the training. Take my data book, my notes, everything I've written, use it. Teach others. Make sure the knowledge doesn't die with me. Sarah's voice was fierce. You're going to survive. We both are, and you're going to teach them yourself. Maybe, but promise anyway. I promise. Jack nodded. Good. Now get some rest. Tomorrow we find out if everything we've prepared is enough. Morning came with false dawn light that turned mountains into shadows. Jack had managed 3 hours of sleep, interrupted by dreams of David Chen and Elizabeth, and battles that blurred together across decades. He woke feeling ancient and exhausted, and more alive than he'd felt in years. The paradox of combat, death's proximity sharpening life's edges until every sensation became vivid, every breath precious, every moment weighted with meaning. He dressed in full combat gear, body armor, helmet, load-bearing vest heavy with ammunition and equipment, the ritual armor of modern warriors. Protection that might stop a bullet or might just make the corpse easier to identify. Outside, the base hummed with controlled chaos. Final preparations, last-minute checks, the organized frenzy of people who knew violence approached and prepared to meet it with everything they had. Jack found Sarah at the armory, loading magazines with the methodical precision their profession demanded. She looked up when he entered, eyes clear despite obvious lack of sleep. Ready? As I'll ever be. She chambered a round in her rifle, the mechanical click loud in the quiet room. Master Chief, whatever happens today, it's been an honor. Honor's mine, Lieutenant. Your father trained me as much as I trained him. Now you're carrying on his legacy. That's the best kind of immortality. They walked together to the valley bottleneck, where the rest of the defenders gathered. 23 people against 40. Except 3 were support staff who'd volunteered despite having minimal combat training, and 2 were injured from a training accident. So really, 18 combat-capable personnel against 40 professional killers. The mathematics remained brutal. Hawk stood on a sandbag barrier, addressing the assembled defenders. His voice carried across the valley with parade ground clarity. Intelligence confirms hostile force is 10 clicks out. ETA 2 hours. They're moving fast, confident. They think they have overwhelming advantage. Our job is to prove them wrong. Hold this line. Make them pay for every meter. Show them that Americans don't roll over for Russian thugs with delusions of grandeur. The defenders cheered, bravado masking fear, the timeless ritual of warriors psyching themselves for combat. Jack had seen it 1,000 times. Participated in it himself until cynicism replaced enthusiasm. But he understood its value. Men fought better when they believed victory was possible. Hawk continued, air support is en route, ETA 6 hours. We hold for 6 hours and we win, that's all. 6 hours. You've all done harder things. Now do this one. More cheering. Hawk climbed down and found Jack. Think we can hold 6 hours? Jack looked at the prepared positions, the layered defenses, the determined faces. Calculated odds with the cold logic that had kept him alive through impossible situations. If they come straight at us, maybe. If they're smart and probe for weaknesses, probably not. If Volkov himself leads the assault, we're dead. Encouraging as always. You asked for honesty. Jack checked his rifle. Chaytak M200, loaded with 12 rounds of precision ammunition. 12 shots to change the course of battle. 12 chances to hit targets at distances that defied belief. But only if I survive to reach my position. You're our ace. Planning on it, Jack climbed to his sniper position, a hide built into the hillside 3,500 meters from the bottleneck. Maximum range for reliable hits. Sarah took position beside him as spotter. Reeves and Morrison established themselves at backup positions. The other snipers dispersed to their assigned coordinates. And then they waited. 2 hours that felt like 2 lifetimes. Sun climbed higher, burning off morning mist. Temperature rose to almost comfortable levels. Birds sang. Wind whispered through trees. Nature indifferent to human drama about to unfold. Jack used the time to range landmarks, wind flags, prominent rocks, distances mentally cataloged, so when targets appeared, he'd know exactly how far away they stood. Preparation was meditation. Calculation was prayer. And in the silence before chaos, Jack found something like peace. Sarah worked beside him with the focused intensity she brought to every task. Checking equipment, running calculations, preparing for contingencies. She'd come so far in such short time, from student to peer, from David Chen's daughter to a warrior in her own right. Movement. Reeves' voice over the radio, calm, professional. The voice of a man who'd seen combat enough times to recognize its approach. Jack swung his scope to the valley mouth. saw vehicles emerging from tree line, 4 pickup trucks, heavy machine guns mounted in beds, 20 men visible, more certainly hiding in the trucks. Contact. Enemy force visible. Range 4,200 meters. Count 20 plus hostiles. Use. Hawk's voice came back. Hold fire. Let them enter the kill zone. Jack tracked the trucks through his scope. Saw faces he couldn't identify at this distance. Saw weapons and gear. Saw confidence in how they moved. These weren't amateurs. These were professionals who'd done this before. The trucks advanced. 3,000 meters. 2,500. 2,000. Entering the valley proper where terrain funneled them into the bottleneck. Where every defender's rifle could reach. Where 40 trained killers would learn that numbers meant nothing against prepared positions and superior marksmanship. 1,500 meters. The truck slowed. Someone had spotted the obstacles. The wire. The evidence of prepared defenses. Commands were shouted. Men dismounted. Began deploying in tactical formation. Smart, Jack thought. Volkov had trained them well. They weren't charging blindly into obvious trap. They were assessing, probing, looking for weaknesses. Weapons free, engage at will. Jack selected his first target. A man who appeared to be directing others. Maybe a squad leader. Maybe Volkov himself. Hard to tell at this distance through scope that reduced human beings to shapes and shadows. Range 2,100 meters. Wind 8 knots, northwest. Temperature 42 degrees. Atmospheric pressure standard. All calculations running through his mind in seconds. Send it. Sarah's voice. Calm, confident. The spotter's blessing that turned calculation into reality. Jack fired. The Chaytak roared. Recoil drove back into his shoulder. Muzzle blast kicked up dust. The bullet flew. 4.3 seconds of flight time. An eternity compressed into heartbeats. Jack watched through the scope. Target down. Clean hit. The man dropped. Others dove for cover. Confusion rippled through the enemy formation. They'd expected resistance, but not this range, not this precision. Then return fire erupted. Heavy machine guns opened up. Tracer rounds arced across the valley like angry fireflies. Bullets impacted around defensive positions. The sound was continuous thunder. The violence sudden and total. The battle had begun. Jack worked methodically. Acquiring targets, calculating, firing. Each shot deliberate, each hit removing one more enemy from the fight. Sarah spotted and called corrections. Together they formed a precision instrument of death reaching across impossible distance. Around them, other defenders engaged, rifles cracking, machine guns chattering. The valley transformed into chaos. Smoke, noise, tracer fire. The sensory overload of combat that turned trained professionals into primitive creatures operating on instinct and training. Jack lost himself in the rhythm. Breathe, acquire, calculate, fire. Breathe, acquire, calculate, fire. A meditation written in gunpowder and blood. He'd done this so many times it had become automatic. Muscle memory carved deeper than conscious thought. 8 rounds fired, 6 confirmed hits, 2 misses. The math of warfare. But 6 hits meant 6 fewer enemies pressing the assault. Reloading, he swapped magazines with practiced speed, chambered a fresh round, returned to the scope, and froze. Standing in the open, 3,000 meters away, was a tall figure in a long coat, fur hat, binoculars aimed directly at Jack's position. Despite the distance, despite the scope between them, Jack felt the weight of that gaze. Nikolai Volkov, alive, here, staring at the man who'd shot him 30 years ago, the enemy who'd survived when he shouldn't, the ghost made flesh. For one heartbeat, Jack couldn't breathe. Past and present collapsed. Afghanistan and Colorado merged. 30 years of guilt crystallized into one moment of recognition. Master Chief, target at 3,000 meters. Center mass. Sarah's voice broke the spell. Take the shot. Jack centered crosshairs on Volkov's chest. Calculated holdoffs that had become second nature. This was it. The shot he'd missed 30 years ago. The shot that had defined 3 decades. The shot that would end the long war or confirm his failure. His finger touched the trigger. 2 pounds of pressure, then 3. 1 more pound and the rifle would fire. 1 more pound and 30 years of guilt would find resolution. Volkov lowered his binoculars. Even across 3,000 meters, Jack felt the man's smile. The taunt. The challenge. Go ahead, old man. Try again. Miss again. Prove you're still the shooter who came 2 inches short. Jack's hands began to shake, sweat on his palms despite cold air, heart rate spiking, all the symptoms of panic he'd thought he'd overcome. He was freezing again. No, not again, not now, not when everything depended on this shot. But his finger wouldn't move, wouldn't apply that final pound of pressure. Some part of his brain remembered Afghanistan, remembered the consequences of pulling this trigger, remembered 8 red circles on a photograph. Master Chief, you have the shot. Sarah's voice was urgent. Take it. I can't. The words came out as whisper, admission of failure, confirmation that some wounds never healed, that some trauma ran too deep for even 30 years to fade. Then I will. Sarah pushed Jack aside, not roughly, not urgently, just firmly. The student taking the rifle from the teacher who could no longer perform. The next generation stepping up when the last faltered. She settled behind the Chaytak. Jack shifted to spotter position, mind numb, body moving on autopilot. His failure, his weakness, his inability to finish what started 30 years ago. Range 3,100 meters, wind 9 knots, temperature 43 degrees. His voice worked even as his hands had failed. Could still do this part, even if he couldn't pull the trigger. Sarah breathed, slow, controlled, finding that zone where the world narrowed to scope and target and the space between. Her finger settled on the trigger. No hesitation, no trauma, just cold calculation and unwavering determination. Sending. The rifle fired. 5.2 seconds of flight time. Jack watched through the spotting scope. Watched Nikolai Volkov standing tall and confident 3,000 meters away. Watched the bullet arrive. Hit. Center mass. Volkov staggered. Fell. Disappeared behind rocks and smoke. For a moment, time stopped. The battle continued around them, but Jack heard nothing, saw nothing, felt nothing but the weight of the moment. Sarah Chen, daughter of David Chen, had just done what Jack McCallister could not. Had hit the target Jack had missed 30 years ago. Had finished the mission that had haunted him across 3 decades. Is he down? Sarah's voice was steady. Professional. No celebration, just tactical assessment. Jack refocused on the spotting scope. Saw enemy forces reacting to their commander's fall. Saw chaos spreading. Saw the tide of battle shift as trained killers realized their leader had been eliminated by invisible sniper 3,000 meters away. He's down. Multiple hostiles attempting recovery. They're pulling back. Jack keyed his radio. All stations, this is Longshot. Enemy commander is down. Repeat, enemy commander is down. They're withdrawing, maintain fire. Don't let them regroup. The defenders poured fire into the retreating enemy. Machine guns, rifles, grenades, everything they had focused on 40 men who'd suddenly lost their reason to fight. Within minutes, the valley fell silent. Enemy vehicles retreating at speed. Bodies left behind. The assault broken not by overwhelming force, but by one perfectly placed shot at impossible distance. Jack sat back against the sandbag barrier, rifle forgotten, mind still processing what had happened. He'd frozen. Again. When it mattered most, his hands had betrayed him. The student had succeeded where the teacher failed. Sarah pulled back from the rifle, face pale, hands shaking from adrenaline dump. She looked at Jack with eyes that held no judgment, no disappointment, just understanding. You taught me everything I needed to make that shot. I couldn't take it myself. No, but you gave me the skills to take it for you. That's what teachers do. They prepare students to succeed where they can't. Jack wanted to believe that, wanted to see his failure as somehow noble. But all he felt was the familiar weight of inadequacy, the confirmation that some wounds never healed, some shots never got easier. The radio crackled. Longshot, this is Viper 6. Confirm hostile force is withdrawing. Air support ETA 30 minutes. You did it, Jack. You held them off. Jack keyed the mic. Negative, sir. Sarah Chen did it. Credit goes to her. Hawk's voice carried relief and pride. Either way, well done. Return to base for debrief. They packed their gear in silence. The battle had lasted 45 minutes. Felt like hours. Jack moved mechanically, muscle memory handling tasks his mind couldn't process. The walk back to base was quiet. Other defenders celebrated, backslapping and cheering. Victory against impossible odds. Jack felt none of it. Just exhaustion and shame, and the familiar sensation of being a ghost who'd overstayed his welcome in the land of the living. At the command center, Hawk met them with genuine warmth. Outstanding work. Both of you. We took minimal casualties. 3 wounded, none serious. Enemy lost 18 KIA, multiple wounded. That's a victory by any metric. But Volkov, Jack asked, did we confirm the kill? Hawk's expression shifted. That's the problem. We sent a patrol to recover the body. They found blood, lots of blood, but no body. Volkov's men took him when they retreated. Is he dead? Unknown. The amount of blood suggests a serious wound, center mass hit from Sarah's shot. But whether it was fatal, we won't know until we find him. Jack felt ice in his stomach, the nightmare continuing. Volkov wounded but alive, carried away by his men. Somewhere out there, either dying slowly or recovering to come again. Sarah spoke up. Sir, that was a kill shot, I'm certain. I believe you, Lieutenant. But until we have a body, we have to assume he's still a threat. Hawk looked at Jack. This isn't over. Jack nodded, had known it from the moment his hands started shaking. From the moment he couldn't pull the trigger. Some stories didn't get clean endings. Some enemies refused to die. Some wars continued long after the shooting stopped. It's never over, he said quietly. That's the lesson. Victory is temporary. Peace is an intermission. The war continues until you can't fight anymore. That's a bleak perspective. That's a realistic perspective. Jack looked at the maps still spread across tables. Volkov's wounded, his team is scattered, but he's still out there, still planning, still determined to finish what he started. Then we prepare for round 2. Hawk's voice carried determination. We fortify, we train, we make sure next time we don't just wound him, we end him. Jack wanted to believe that, wanted to think there would be a next time when his hands were steady, when trauma didn't override training, when he could be the warrior he'd been before Afghanistan carved holes in his competence. But sitting in that command center, surrounded by maps and reports, in the aftermath of a battle he should have won decisively, Jack knew the truth. His war was over, not because he wanted it to end, but because his body and mind had mutinied, had decided enough was enough, had refused one more time to put him through the violence his profession demanded. Sarah touched his arm. Master Chief, you should rest. You've been awake for nearly 40 hours. Can't sleep, not yet. Not until we know what happened to Volkov. They monitored radio traffic for the next 6 hours. Patrols searching mountains. Helicopters finally arriving to provide air cover. Intelligence analyzing blood trails and vehicle tracks. Piecing together the story of what happened after Sarah's shot landed. The picture that emerged was frustrating. Volkov had been medevaced by his team, loaded into a truck and driven at high speed toward the border. Tracked for 20 kilometers before losing them in dense forest. Trail going cold with no idea whether their quarry was dead, dying, or already receiving medical treatment that would save his life. Schrodinger's enemy, simultaneously dead and alive until observation collapsed probability into certainty. Jack hated the uncertainty, hated not knowing if the war had ended or merely paused. But hate changed nothing. The mountains kept their secrets, and Volkov, dead or alive, remained beyond reach. By evening, exhaustion claimed its due. Jack finally allowed himself to be escorted back to his cabin. Reeves and Sarah came with him, the 3 of them too wired to sleep but too tired to function. They sat in Jack's living room, drinking coffee that did nothing to combat fatigue. The cabin felt different after combat, smaller, less isolated. A place that had been refuge now felt like bunker, protection against a world that refused to let old warriors rest. Sarah broke the silence. Master Chief, what you did today, guiding me through that shot, that was the most important thing you could have done. I didn't pull the trigger. No, you taught someone else how to pull it. That's worth more. Every shot I make from now on carries your knowledge, your experience, your legacy. That's how we cheat death, not by living forever, by ensuring what we know doesn't die with us. Jack recognized Elizabeth's words from his dream, the same wisdom delivered by his dead wife and David Chen's living daughter. Maybe there was truth in repetition. Maybe the universe was trying to tell him something through the people who loved him. Your father said something similar. The night before he died, he said a warrior's true legacy isn't the battles he wins. It's the warriors he trains to win battles after he's gone. Then he'd be proud of both of us. Sarah smiled tiredly. You trained me, I'll train others. The chain continues. That's how we honor him. Reeves raised his coffee cup. To legacy, to teachers and students, to old warriors and young ones, to the chain that stretches across generations. They touched cups, drank. Let silence settle over the cabin like snow. Outside, mountains stood eternal. Inside, three people found tentative peace and survival and shared purpose. Jack looked at the photographs on his mantle. 8 red circles. 8 ghosts who'd waited 30 years for him to finish what started in another valley and another time. He'd failed again. But maybe Sarah was right. Maybe his failure had enabled her success. Maybe that was enough. He took down the photograph of 10 men in Afghanistan, studied the faces. David Chen, Tommy Martinez, 6 others gone too long, and himself, young, confident, unmarked by loss. That man was dead, had died in that valley alongside his teammates. What survived was something different, something that had learned pain and guilt and the terrible burden of living while others didn't. But maybe that man, broken and haunted as he was, still had value, not as a shooter, but as a teacher, a guide, a bridge between generations who could pass hard-won knowledge to those brave enough to carry it forward. Jack pulled out his marker, looked at the 9th red circle he'd drawn around his own face. Then carefully, deliberately, he erased it. Because he wasn't dead, wasn't a ghost, was something more complicated than simple categories could contain. He was a survivor, a teacher, a father figure to young warriors who needed guidance only he could provide. And for now, in this moment, that was enough. Sarah watched him erase the circle, smiled. Smart move, Master Chief. It's just Jack. And yeah, took me long enough to figure it out. They sat together as night deepened. 3 warriors who'd faced impossible odds and survived. 3 people bound by blood and training in the strange alchemy of shared trauma. Somewhere in the mountains, Volkov was either dead or dying or planning round 2. The war continued. Peace remained elusive. But for now, for this moment, they had each other, had purpose, had tomorrow. And for warriors like them, that was victory enough. The mountains stood witness, patient, eternal, caring nothing for human drama. They'd seen 1,000 generations fight and die and claim glory. Would see 1,000 more before erosion wore them down to plains. But in that cabin, in that moment, 3 people claimed something the mountains could never understand. Connection, legacy, the defiant human belief that meaning could be carved from chaos. That sacrifice served purpose, that the dead could be honored by the living. It wasn't peace, but it was close enough. 3 days after the battle, intelligence confirmed what Jack McCallister had feared. Nikolai Volkov was alive, wounded, recovering in a compound 200 kilometers north near the Canadian border. And according to intercepted communications, planning something that made the first assault look like a reconnaissance probe. Jack stood in the command center at 0600, studying satellite imagery of the compound, a fortified ranch house surrounded by forest. Guards visible, heavy weapons emplacements, the lair of a wounded predator gathering strength for one final strike. Colonel Hawk Harrison stood beside him, face grim. He survived Sarah's shot. Center mass hit at 3,000 meters, should have killed him. But apparently Volkov wears body armor that could stop a tank round. Jack felt ice in his stomach. So the perfect shot had been negated by preparation, by an enemy who understood his opponents well enough to armor against their capabilities. That was the difference between amateurs and professionals. Amateurs relied on surprise. Professionals prepared for every contingency. "What's he planning?" Jack asked. Hawk pulled up more imagery, thermal scans showing activity inside the compound. "We count 15 personnel, down from 40. But intelligence suggests he's calling in reinforcements. Another 20 to 30 operators en route from overseas, ETA 72 hours. So we're back where we started, outnumbered, outgunned, waiting for an enemy to hit us on his terms." "Not exactly." Hawk's expression hardened. "This time we don't wait. We take the fight to him. Surgical strike, small team, in and out before reinforcements arrive." Jack processed the implications. "You're talking about an assassination mission. I'm talking about eliminating a threat before he eliminates us. Volkov won't stop, Jack. He's dying. Cancer's eating him alive. He's got maybe 2 months left. That makes him the most dangerous kind of enemy, one with nothing to lose and everything to prove." The logic was sound, but logic didn't account for the variables that made special operations so unpredictable. Weather, mechanical failure, human error. The 1,000 things that could turn a simple mission into a catastrophe. Who'd lead the strike? Hawk met his eyes. "I need someone who knows Volkov, who understands how he thinks, who has personal stake in seeing this finished." "You want me to go?" "I need you to go." Hawk's voice carried weight. "This isn't just about revenge, Jack. Volkov has intelligence on our operations, our capabilities, our personnel. As long as he's alive, everyone on this base is at risk. Your students are at risk. Sarah is at risk. The mention of Sarah's name hit harder than Hawk probably intended. Jack had spent 3 days watching her process the battle, the aftermath, the weight of having killed men at distance. She handled it better than most, but he saw the cost in her eyes, the knowledge that her skill had ended lives. That was a burden every sniper carried. One Jack knew intimately. What's the mission profile? Hawk spread tactical maps across the table. 4-person team, infiltrate at night, neutralize guards, reach Volkov, confirm kill, extract before response forces arrive. Window of opportunity is 6 hours between guard changes. 4 people against 15, better odds than before. The team would be you, Sarah, Reeves, and Morrison. Best shooters we have, most experienced operators. Jack thought about Sarah going on a kill mission, targeting the man who'd orchestrated her father's death. Thought about leading her into a compound where every corner could hide an ambush. Thought about the responsibility of keeping David Chen's daughter alive when he'd failed to keep David himself alive. Sarah doesn't need to go. This isn't her fight. She disagrees. Hawk pulled out a sheet of paper, her volunteer statement. Filed 2 hours ago, she says Volkov killed her father. She deserves to be there when we finish it. Jack read the statement. Sarah's handwriting precise and determined, every word carefully chosen, every sentence radiating purpose. She was right. This was her fight as much as his. Maybe more. She'd grown up without a father because of Volkov's actions 30 years ago. If anyone had earned the right to see this through, it was her. When do we move? Tomorrow night. 24 hours to prepare. Jack, I know what you're thinking. You froze during the battle. You couldn't take the shot. But this is different. Close quarters, multiple targets, no time for hesitation. That's what worries me. Jack's voice was quiet. If I freeze in close combat, people die. My people. Sarah. Then don't freeze. Hawk's tone was firm, but not unkind. You've done hundreds of these missions. Your body knows what to do even when your mind doesn't. Trust your training. Trust your team. And most importantly, trust that 30 years of experience doesn't evaporate because you had one moment of weakness. Jack wanted to believe that, wanted to think muscle memory would override trauma, but he'd seen too many warriors broken by single moments, single failures that unraveled decades of competence. The mind was fragile, confidence was brittle, and once broken, neither healed easily. I'll do it. But if I freeze, if I become a liability, Sarah takes command. No questions, no arguments. Agreed, Hawk extended his hand. Good luck, Jack. And remember, this isn't about proving anything. It's about eliminating a threat. Get in, complete the mission, get out, simple. Nothing's ever simple. Jack found Sarah in the armory, cleaning her rifle with the meditative focus their profession demanded. She looked up when he entered, eyes clear, but carrying weight that hadn't been there a week ago. The weight of taking lives, of understanding what her skill meant in practical terms. Master Chief, I heard about the mission. So I hear you volunteered. Sarah set down her cleaning rod. Of course I did. Volkov killed my father, tried to kill you. Nearly killed everyone on this base. He needs to be stopped. Stopped or killed? There's a difference. Sarah met his eyes without flinching. Killed. I'm not naive about what we do. I put a bullet in his chest 3 days ago intending to kill him. Didn't work. Tomorrow night I'll do it again. And this time, I'll make sure. Jack recognized the tone, the hardness born from crossing a line that could never be uncrossed. She'd killed men during the battle, watched through her scope as bullets ended lives. That changed people, some shattered, some hardened. Sarah was hardening. Whether that was good or bad remained to be seen. This mission is different from defensive sniping. We're going into his territory, close quarters, high risk. If things go wrong, we might not make it out. I understand the risks. Do you? Jack pulled up a chair, sat across from her. Your father died on a mission like this. Went into enemy territory with good intelligence and solid planning. Everything went wrong anyway. I won't sugarcoat it, Sarah. There's a good chance one or more of us don't come back. Then we don't come back. But at least we'll have tried. At least we'll have done everything possible to end this. Jack studied her face, saw determination, saw acceptance of mortality, saw David Chen's daughter ready to follow her father's path regardless of cost. He should have been proud. Instead, he felt fear. The fear of losing another person he cared about. Another connection to a past he couldn't fix. I promised your father I'd take care of you. 29 years too late. But I'm trying to honor that promise. Taking you on a suicide mission isn't taking care of you. Sarah's voice was gentle. Master Chief, the best way to take care of me is to trust me. To recognize I'm a warrior, not a child. I've earned my place on this team. Let me do my job. Jack wanted to argue, wanted to pull rank, wanted to protect her from the violence he knew awaited. But she was right. She'd earned this. And treating her like fragile porcelain instead of tempered steel would dishonor everything David had taught him about respecting fellow warriors. All right, you're on the team, but you follow orders without question. If I say fall back, you fall back. If I say abort, we abort. Clear? Crystal clear. They spent the day preparing, reviewing compound layouts, studying guard patterns, memorizing approaches and escape routes. The detailed planning that turned suicide missions into merely dangerous ones. Daniel Reeves and Jake Morrison joined them, both veterans of similar operations, both understanding the risks, both committed anyway. By evening, they were as ready as humans could be. Equipment packed, weapons zeroed, routes memorized. All that remained was the waiting. The longest hours, when the mind had nothing to do but imagine scenarios, most of them ending badly. Jack returned to his cabin at 2100, found Tommy Martinez waiting on the porch. The old medic held 2 glasses and a bottle of bourbon that had to be older than most of the SEALs on base. Figured you could use a drink. Jack accepted a glass. They sat in comfortable silence. 2 survivors of that day 30 years ago when the world exploded and only they crawled out of the rubble. Tommy had been unconscious for most of it. Jack sometimes envied that mercy. You don't have to do this, Tommy said finally. Could send someone else. Younger, faster, less haunted. And who'd that be? Everyone on this base is haunted by something. At least my ghosts are specific. Tommy sipped bourbon, grimaced at the burn, smiled at the warmth. You know what David told me the night before we deployed? He said he had a bad feeling. Said if things went wrong, I should tell you it wasn't your fault. Jack went still. He said that? Word for word. He knew the risks, knew the odds. Went anyway because that's what we did. What we do. Tommy looked at Jack. You've been carrying guilt for 30 years that David specifically asked you not to carry. Maybe it's time to put it down. I got him killed. He got himself killed by doing his job, by being a SEAL, by standing between evil and innocence. That's not on you, Jack. That's just the price we sometimes pay. Jack wanted to believe that, wanted to let go of the weight he'd carried so long it felt like part of his skeleton. But guilt had its hooks in deep, 30 years deep. Letting go meant accepting he might not be responsible for every bad thing that happened to people around him. And if he wasn't responsible, then he had no control. And lack of control terrified him more than enemy fire ever had. I'm scared, Tommy. First time in 40 years I'm actually scared. Good. Fear keeps you alive, makes you careful. It's the ones who stop being scared who end up in body bags. They drank in silence until the bottle was half empty and the stars were bright overhead. Tommy stood to leave, paused at the porch steps. Bring her back, Jack. Sarah, whatever happens to the rest of us, bring her back. That's how you honor David, not by dying for him, by keeping his daughter alive. Jack walked in, unable to speak past the emotion in his throat. Tommy left, and Jack sat alone with his ghosts and his bourbon and his fear. Tomorrow night, he'd walk into the valley of death one more time. Would his hands work? Would his training override trauma? Would he be the warrior he'd been, or the broken old man he feared he'd become? Only one way to find out. At 0200, 4 shadows moved through forest 200 kilometers north of Black Ridge. Jack led, followed by Sarah, then Reeves, then Morrison. Each carried suppressed weapons and enough ammunition to fight their way out if stealth failed. Each knew the odds. Each came anyway. The compound sat in a clearing ahead. Lights visible through windows, guards smoking on the porch, overconfident, believing distance and isolation provided security. They were wrong. Jack raised his fist. The team froze. He pointed to positions. Sarah and Reeves would establish overwatch on a ridge 800 meters out, provide covering fire if needed. Jack and Morrison would breach the compound. Find Volkov, end him. Simple plan, maximum flexibility, minimum time in the kill zone. Sarah touched Jack's shoulder before moving to her position. Be careful. You too. She melted into darkness. Jack watched her go, then turned to Morrison. Young, confident, the kind of operator who believed skill could overcome any obstacle. Jack had been like that once. Before Afghanistan taught him that skill was just one variable in an equation that included luck, timing, and the whims of uncaring universe. They moved toward the compound, stayed in shadows, avoided sight lines, 200 meters, 100, 50, close enough to hear guards talking, Russian mixed with English, mercenaries from a dozen countries united by money and violence. Jack signaled to Morrison. Split up, Jack would take the front, Morrison the back, simultaneous entry, maximum confusion. Morrison nodded, disappeared around the building. Jack checked his watch. 60 seconds, then all hell would break loose. He used the time to center himself, to find that calm place where fear existed but didn't control, where 30 years of training rose to the surface and pushed trauma down, where Jack McCallister, the broken veteran, became Longshot the SEAL. One last time. 30 seconds. He drew his pistol. Suppressed Sig Sauer P226, the weapon he'd carried for 20 years, knew its weight, its balance, its capabilities, an extension of his body. 15 seconds. Movement on the porch, guard turning, cigarette glowing, presenting his back, opportunity. 5 seconds. Jack stepped from shadow. Raised pistol, center mass, exhaled, fired. The suppressed shot was thunder quiet. The guard dropped without sound. Jack was moving before the body hit ground. Front door, unlocked. Arrogant. He pushed through into a living room decorated with Soviet memorabilia and modern weapons. Empty. Voices from deeper in the house. Gunfire erupted from the back. Morrison's entry. Suppressed shots mixing with shouts and return fire. The element of surprise dying as it always did. Plans surviving first contact with enemy? Exactly never. Jack moved toward the voices, toward the heart of the compound where Volkov would be. Wounded, recovering, vulnerable. He cleared the hallway, empty. Cleared the kitchen, empty. Cleared a bedroom. Found 2 guards scrambling for weapons. Jack fired twice. Both dropped. Muscle memory, no thought, just action. More gunfire from the back. Louder now. Automatic weapons. Morrison was in trouble. Jack wanted to help, but the mission was Volkov. Everything else was secondary. Then he was in the main room, where Nikolai Volkov sat in a chair like some dying king holding court. Bandages visible under open shirt. Face pale from blood loss, but eyes bright with intelligence and hate. And surrounding him, 5 guards with rifles pointed at the doorway where Jack stood. Checkmate. Jack McCallister. Volkov's English carried heavy accent but was perfectly clear. I wondered if you would come, hoped you would. One last conversation before the end. Jack kept his pistol trained on Volkov. Knew it was futile. 5 rifles against 1 pistol. But training died hard. Your men will kill me if I shoot you. Of course, but you will shoot me anyway. Because that is what you do. That is who you are. The man who tries and fails. The words cut deep, intentionally. Volkov had studied his enemy. Knew where the wounds were. Knew how to twist the knife. Why, Jack asked. Why all this? 30 years of planning for what? Revenge? That's childish. Volkov laughed. Pain flickered across his face from the movement. Not revenge. Legacy. You see, when you shot me in 1989, I was supposed to die. Mission complete. Enemy eliminated. But I survived. Crawled away. Spent years recovering. And in that time, I realized something. We are connected, you and I. 2 sides of same coin. Shooters across impossible distance. 1 hit, 1 missed. That miss defined us both. I came within 2 inches. Exactly. 2 inches. At 3,500 meters, that is remarkable shooting. But not quite good enough, and that not quite haunted you, made you hesitate, made you weak. Volkov leaned forward. 3 days ago, you had me in your scope. 3,000 meters. Perfect conditions. You froze. Could not pull trigger. I felt your hesitation across the distance. How did you know? Because I know you, Jack McCallister. I have studied you for 30 years. Know your fears, your failures, your guilt. I know you blame yourself for 8 dead men. Carry that weight every day. And I wanted you to carry it forever. Wanted you to live knowing you failed. So you let me live in 89. This was always about torture, about justice. You tried to kill me. came close. So I made sure the price of that attempt was higher than you could bear. Made you watch your team die. Made you the sole survivor. Made you carry guilt that would crush most men. Volkov smiled, and it worked. Look at you. Old, broken, haunted. A ghost pretending to be alive. Jack felt rage building, the kind that bypassed thought and went straight to action. He could shoot, would die, but would take Volkov with him. That had to count for something. Don't! Volkov's voice was sharp. Your student, Sarah Chen, she is 800 meters away with rifle. My men have RPG aimed at her position. You shoot me, they fire rocket. She dies. You die. Everyone dies. Is that how you want this to end? Jack froze. Not from trauma this time. From calculation. From recognizing trap within trap. Volkov had planned every contingency, every response, 30 years of preparation coming to fruition. What do you want? I want you to know the truth. Volkov coughed. Blood flecked his lips. Your shot in 89, it was perfect. Wind, distance, calculation, everything correct. You did not miss. What are you talking about? I wore body armor. Ceramic plate rated for sniper fire. Your bullet hit exactly where you aimed, but the plate stopped it. Broke my shoulder, cracked ribs, but did not penetrate. Did not kill. Jack felt the world tilt. You're lying. Am I? Think about it. 2 inches right at that distance. With your skill. With David Chen's spotting. What are the odds you both miscalculated by exactly the same margin? The odds were astronomical. Jack had replayed that shot 10,000 times. Never understood how both he and David had gotten the win wrong by the same amount. But if the shot was actually perfect, if the only variable was body armor they didn't know about, the mortars, that was planned, you knew we were there. Of course, I let you track me, led you to that valley, set up mortars pre-sighted on likely sniper positions, waited for you to take your shot. When you did, we had your location, called fire, killed your team. You survived because your friend threw himself on top of you. Absorbed the shrapnel that would have killed you both. Jack's vision tunneled. 30 years. 30 years of guilt, of self-recrimination, of believing he'd failed. And it was all a lie, a setup, a trap he'd walked into while believing himself the hunter when he was actually the prey. Why are you telling me this? Because I am dying, cancer, 2 months if I am lucky, and I wanted you to know before the end, wanted you to understand that everything you have suffered was my design, that I broke you intentionally, that your entire adult life has been defined by my revenge. That is legacy. That is victory. The rage that had been building exploded. Jack raised his pistol. 5 rifles tracked him. Volkov smiled. Go ahead. Pull the trigger. Complete the cycle. Die knowing you took me with you, but at the cost of your student. David Chen's daughter. Kill her like you killed her father. The words stopped Jack cold. Because Volkov was right. Shooting meant Sarah died. Meant failing David again. Meant everything he tried to do, training her, protecting her, honoring his friend's memory, would end in the worst possible way. That is why you will not shoot. Because you are not like me. You care about your people more than you care about winning. That weakness is what makes you human and what makes you beatable. Jack lowered his pistol, hating himself, hating Volkov, hating the situation, but unable to sacrifice Sarah to satisfy his rage. Good. Now put down weapon, kick it away, then sit. We will talk until my men are ready to move you. Jack complied, sat in a chair facing Volkov. 2 old warriors at the end of their road. One dying from cancer, one dying from knowledge that his entire life had been a lie. Outside, gunfire had stopped. Morrison was either dead or captured. Jack had led him here. Another man's blood on his hands. The list kept growing. Your friend is dead, Volkov said matter-of-factly. My men are moving on the ridge where your students hide. In 5 minutes, this will all be over. You will have failed completely, and I will have won. Even in death, I win. Why not just kill me now? Because I want you to see them die first. Want you to carry that weight too. Want your last thoughts to be about how you failed everyone who depended on you. Jack sat in his chair, hands bound, pistol out of reach, watching Volkov gloat. And for the first time in 30 years, the guilt lifted. Because it wasn't his fault. Any of it. The shot was perfect. The team died because of Volkov's trap, not Jack's failure. 30 years of self-recrimination based on a lie. The revelation should have been freeing. Instead, it made him angrier than he'd ever been. Because Volkov had stolen those 30 years, had twisted a good man into a broken shell, had weaponized guilt until it became armor against living. And in that anger, Jack found clarity. You know what your mistake was, Volkov? Enlighten me. You assumed I was alone. You assumed the team was just 4 people. You assumed you knew everything about our capabilities. Volkov's smile faltered. What are you saying? I'm saying you studied me for 30 years, but you don't know Sarah Chen. She's not like me. She's better, faster, less haunted, and most importantly, she doesn't freeze. Outside, the first suppressed rifle shot cracked through the night. Then another, then another. Methodical, professional, deadly. Your RPG team is down. Jack's voice was calm. Sarah just eliminated them from 800 meters. In darkness, while under threat. Because that's what she does. That's what I taught her. Volkov's face went pale. Impossible. You keep using that word. But Sarah specializes in impossible. 6,000 meters, moving targets, extreme wind. She's the shooter I was 30 years ago, before you broke me. And unlike me, she has zero hesitation about killing you. The radio on one guard's belt crackled. Perimeter team is down. Repeat, perimeter is down. We have incoming precision fire from multiple angles. Not multiple angles. Jack smiled grimly. Just one very angry woman with a really good rifle and perfect shot placement. Reeves is probably feeding her targets. They've been training together for months. Volkov barked orders in Russian. Guards moved to windows, returned fire blindly into darkness. But Sarah was invisible, a ghost with a scope, picking targets methodically. A guard at the front window dropped. Headshot, clean. Then the guard at the side window. Then one trying to radio for backup. Sarah working through the team with the efficiency Jack had trained into her. No wasted shots, no hesitation, just pure execution of the craft. Stop her, Volkov screamed. Someone stop her! But there were only 2 guards left now, and they were too busy trying not to die to follow orders. One broke, ran for the back door. The suppressed crack of Sarah's rifle reached Jack's ears a split second before the guard fell in the doorway. She'd adjusted for his movement, led him perfectly, dropped him mid-stride. The last guard threw down his weapon, raised hands high, smart man, choosing survival over loyalty to a dying warlord who'd already lost. Volkov looked at Jack with eyes that had gone from confident to terrified. This cannot be happening. But it is, because you made one critical error. You assumed your victory over me 30 years ago meant I had nothing left to teach. That breaking me ended my usefulness. But a broken man can still pass knowledge to the unbroken, can still create warriors who don't carry his scars. Jack leaned forward, despite his bound hands. You broke me, Volkov. Spent 30 years breaking me. But I built something stronger than I ever was. And she just dismantled your entire security force while you sat here gloating. The front door opened slowly. Sarah Chen entered in full tactical stance, rifle up, movements fluid, eyes cold and focused. She scanned the room, assessed the bound Jack, the cowering guard, the pale Volkov, made tactical decisions in heartbeats. Master Chief, are you hit? I'm fine. Morrison? Sarah's expression flickered. Pain, regret, didn't make it. He engaged 4 hostiles in the back section, took 3 down before they got him, bought me 30 seconds to reposition and start clearing the perimeter. Jack closed his eyes briefly. Morrison, 25 years old, dead. The price kept climbing, but there was no time for grief now. That would come later. Always came later. She turned to Volkov, rifle still trained on his chest. You're the one who killed my father. Volkov tried to smile, could not quite manage it through his fear and pain. David Chen, yes, good man, good spotter. Pity he had to die. Sarah's finger tightened on the trigger. The telltale tension Jack had seen 1,000 times. The moment before the shot, the point where intention became action. Sarah, wait! Jack's voice cut through the moment. Don't do it like this. Why not? He deserves it. He killed my father, orchestrated the ambush, tortured you for 30 years with false guilt, tried to kill everyone on our base. How many more reasons do you need? As many as it takes, but not like this. Not in anger, not as execution. Jack kept his voice calm, level, the voice of a teacher guiding a student through the hardest lesson. That's what he does. What he did to me. Turn justified action into something dark, into revenge, into hatred. Don't let him corrupt you that way. He deserves to die. Agreed, but he deserves to die by justice, by trial, by facing what he's done in front of the world, not by a bullet from an angry daughter in a compound nobody will remember. My father didn't get justice. He got an unmarked grave and a sealed file, which is exactly why Volkov needs something different. Your father was a warrior who died with honor. Volkov is a terrorist who's lived with none. Make him face that difference. Make him answer for it. Sarah stood frozen, rifle trained, finger on trigger. 1 pound of pressure away from ending a 30-year war, from avenging her father, from satisfying rage that had burned since she learned what really happened. But she was also David Chen's daughter, and David had taught her through Jack, through example, through legacy, that warriors didn't murder. Warriors executed justice with discipline and honor. Slowly, painfully, Sarah lowered her rifle, exhaled, stepped back. Tears streamed down her face, but the weapon pointed at the ground. You're right, she looked at Jack. He's not worth becoming something I'm not. Not worth betraying everything my father stood for. Jack felt pride swell in his chest despite the situation. That's David Chen's daughter. That's the warrior your father would be proud of. Volkov laughed. Weak but genuine, so noble, so principled, and so foolish. His hand moved toward his pocket. Jack saw it, tried to shout warning, but Volkov was faster than a dying man should be. He pulled a detonator, pressed the button, smiled at them both. The compound exploded. The world became fire and violence and noise. Walls blew outward in fragments. Floor heaved upward. Ceiling collapsed downward. Jack's chair disintegrated beneath him. He was airborne, flying through space filled with debris and flame and death. He hit something hard, wall or floor or ground, couldn't tell. The impact drove air from lungs, stole consciousness for a span of heartbeats. When awareness returned, he was outside, 20 feet from what used to be the compound, now just a burning crater. His ears rang, high-pitched whine that drowned everything. Vision blurred, swam, doubled. He tried to move, hands still bound, shoulders screaming from the landing. But alive, somehow alive. Sarah. Where was Sarah? Jack forced himself to his knees, then to his feet, stumbled toward the inferno. She'd been in the doorway that no longer existed, the doorway that was now part of a debris field scattered across 50 meters. He searched frantically, found the remaining guard, dead, crushed by falling timber, found Volkov's body, or what was left of it. The old Russian had chosen to die on his terms, taking everyone with him. Final revenge from beyond the grave. But no Sarah. Jack pushed deeper into the destruction. Heat searing exposed skin, smoke choking, calling her name. Hearing nothing but the roar of flames and the ringing in his ears that wouldn't stop. Then movement. 30 feet away, a figure crawling from beneath a collapsed wall section. Dark hair, small frame. Sarah. Jack ran, or tried to. His legs didn't work right. Something wrong with his left knee. Something torn or broken. Didn't matter, he covered the distance. Reached her, grabbed her shoulders. Sarah looked up at him, blood on her face from a cut above her eye, soot and ash covering everything. But eyes clear, focused, alive. Can you move? Jack had to shout to hear himself over the ringing. Legs trapped, beam. Jack looked. Heavy timber across her right leg, pinning her. The beam was burning, slow but inevitable. They had maybe 3 minutes before the fire reached her. He positioned himself, hands still bound, but he could grip with his forearms. Lifted with everything he had. 62 years old. Body broken by 4 decades of violence. Shoulders torn, knee damaged, but fueled by absolute refusal to let David Chen's daughter burn. The beam moved. Not much. Inch, 2 inches. Sarah tried to pull free. Couldn't. Not enough clearance. Jack roared, lifted harder, felt something tear in his back, felt vertebrae grind, felt the limit of human capability stretching and threatening to snap. But the beam moved another inch, then another. Now, Jack gasped. Sarah pulled, screamed as her leg dragged across broken ground. But she was free, clear of the beam. Jack dropped it. collapsed beside her, lungs burning, vision graying, body at the absolute limit. They lay in ash and embers, gasping, burned, injured, but alive. "Can you stand?" Jack finally managed. Sarah tried, failed. Leg won't support weight, broken or badly sprained. Jack looked around. The compound was fully engulfed. Secondary explosions as ammunition cooked off. They needed to move, needed to get clear before the whole thing came down or enemy reinforcements arrived. He pulled Sarah's arm over his shoulder, stood, barely. His knee shrieked protest. Her leg dangled useless. Together they were barely one functional person. But one was enough. They stumbled away from the inferno. 50 meters, 100, 200, finally collapsed in snow that felt cold and clean and perfect against burned skin. Jack keyed his radio. "Reeves, status." Reeves's voice came back, strained but steady, clear of compound. "Saw the explosion. En route to your position." "Morrison?" "Confirmed KIA. I've got his body. We're not leaving him." "Understood. Rally on my position. Sarah's wounded. Need immediate medical evacuation." "Roger. 3 minutes." They lay in snow, watching the compound burn. Volkov's funeral pyre. The end of a 30-year war. The closing of a chapter written in blood and trauma and stubborn determination. "Is he dead?" Sarah asked between coughs. Jack looked at the crater, the total destruction. No one could survive that. Even the body they'd seen had been at ground zero of the blast. Volkov had triggered the detonation manually, had chosen to die rather than face capture and trial. "He's dead. Confirmed this time." "Good." Sarah closed her eyes. Her voice was so quiet, Jack almost missed it. "Dad would be proud. We finished it. He'd be proud of you for making the hard choice, for not pulling that trigger in anger, for being better than our enemies." "Was I? Better?" "I wanted to kill him so badly." "But you didn't. That's what matters. Discipline over emotion. Justice over revenge. Your father taught you that through me, and you honored him by living it." They lay in silence. Two warriors who'd gone into hell together and emerged scarred but whole. The mountain night pressed close around them, stars invisible behind smoke and flame, but alive, both alive. Reeves arrived with 2 other SEALs who'd been providing outer perimeter security. They had Morrison's body wrapped and ready for transport, had medical supplies, had communication with Black Ridge for extraction. The helicopter arrived 40 minutes later, loaded them all, living and dead, lifted off into darkness. Jack looked down at the burning compound, at Volkov's final resting place, at the end of everything. "It's over," Sarah said beside him. Her leg was splinted, burns treated, pain medication starting to work. Jack wanted to agree, wanted to believe killing Volkov ended the cycle, but he'd been a warrior too long to believe in clean endings. There would be more enemies, more missions, more costs. That was the nature of the profession they'd chosen. But for now, for this moment, they could rest, could mourn Morrison, could process what they'd done and seen, could begin the long work of healing. The helicopter flew south toward Black Ridge, toward safety, toward whatever came next. Jack closed his eyes, felt the revelation from Volkov settling into his bones. The shot had been perfect, the guilt unwarranted, the 30 years of self-recrimination based on deliberate psychological warfare. He should feel liberated, should feel relief. Instead, he felt angry, angry that so much time had been stolen, that so many years had been wasted on false guilt, that Volkov's final revenge was making Jack realize too late that he'd been innocent all along. But there was also something else, something growing beneath the anger, the understanding that even wasted years could serve purpose if they led to this moment, to Sarah alive, to Morrison's sacrifice meaning something, to the training program that would continue, to legacy built from ruins. Maybe that was enough. Maybe redemption wasn't about erasing the past, but about building a future that honored it. Maybe broken things could still create whole things. Maybe ghosts could finally rest if the living chose to truly live. The helicopter flew on through darkness, carrying survivors and fallen, carrying the weight of choices made and prices paid, carrying warriors toward whatever rest they could find in a world that never stopped demanding sacrifice. And in that darkness, Jack McCallister allowed himself to believe something he'd stopped believing 30 years ago. That tomorrow existed, that purpose remained, that broken men could still build lasting things if they refused to quit. Behind them, Volkov's compound burned down to ash and memory. Ahead, Black Ridge waited with medical care and debriefing and the familiar rhythms of military life. And somewhere between those 2 points, in the space between past and future, Jack found something he'd thought lost forever. Not peace, not yet, but the possibility of peace. The understanding that guilt based on lies could be released, that real healing could begin, that the chain connecting generations could continue unbroken if he chose to honor the dead by truly living. It wasn't victory, but it was close enough. The mountains stood eternal in the darkness below, patient, indifferent. They'd witnessed this same story countless times across countless years. Warriors fighting, dying, claiming meaning from chaos. The mountains cared nothing for human struggles, simply waited for erosion to reduce them all to dust. But in the helicopter climbing through cold air toward dawn, the humans who'd fought in the mountain's shadow claimed something the mountains could never understand. Purpose carved from tragedy, meaning built from sacrifice. The defiant human belief that what they did mattered even if the universe disagreed. Jack looked at Sarah, at Reeves, at Morrison's flag-draped form, at the faces of warriors who'd risked everything for each other, for mission, for honor, for the simple belief that some things were worth fighting for even when victory was uncertain and the cost was high. That was humanity at its best, flawed, mortal, fragile, but refusing to quit, refusing to surrender to darkness, refusing to believe that individual lives were meaningless in the vast, cold universe. And in a military helicopter flying through mountain darkness, that refusal felt like its own kind of victory. Small, personal, unrecognized by history, but real nonetheless. The helicopter flew on. Dawn approached, and Jack McCallister, 62 years old, 4 decades of service, 30 years of false guilt, finally lifted, allowed himself to believe in tomorrow. Not because tomorrow promised happiness or peace or easy answers, but because tomorrow offered the chance to continue, to teach, to build, to honor the fallen by ensuring their sacrifice served lasting purpose. That was enough. That was everything. That was the only victory that mattered. The helicopter touched down at Black Ridge as dawn painted the mountains gold and crimson. Jack McCallister stepped onto the tarmac feeling every one of his 62 years. Burns covered his arms. Smoke had scorched his lungs. His body screamed for rest. But rest would come later. First came responsibility. Behind him, Daniel Reeves and 2 medics carried Jake Morrison's body bag. 25 years old, dead in a compound 200 kilometers from anything that mattered. Another name for the wall, another family that would receive a folded flag and carefully worded condolences that meant nothing against the weight of permanent loss. Sarah Chen limped off the helicopter on her own power, refusing the stretcher. Her leg was wrapped where the beam had trapped her. Burns marked her face, but her eyes were clear, focused. The look of someone who'd walked through fire and come out tempered rather than broken. Colonel Hawk Harrison waited with Tommy Martinez and a full medical team. His face showed relief mixed with sorrow. He'd sent 4 operators on a suicide mission. 3 came back. By military standards, that was acceptable losses. By human standards, it was tragedy. Volkov? Hawk asked without preamble. Dead. Confirmed. Jack's voice was hoarse from smoke inhalation. He detonated the compound rather than be captured. Took himself and half the structure with him. And Morrison? Hawk already knew. Could see it in Reeves' face, in the body bag. But protocol demanded the words be spoken. Required the formal acknowledgement of loss. KIA during initial breach. Fought to the end, bought us the time we needed. Hawk nodded slowly. His family? Parents in Ohio. Younger sister at Penn State. I'll make the call. No. Hawk's voice was firm. I sent him. That makes it my responsibility. You get medical attention. Debrief can wait. Jack wanted to argue, wanted to claim the burden of informing Morrison's family. But Hawk was right. Command carried certain obligations. Making the hard calls was one of them. Tommy Martinez approached Sarah, medical bag in hand. Let's get that leg looked at, Lieutenant. I'm fine, Doc. That's what they always say right before they pass out from blood loss. Now sit down before I get the colonel to order you. Sarah sat. Let Tommy examine her wounds with the gentle efficiency he'd developed over 40 years of patching broken warriors. Jack watched them. The old medic who'd survived Afghanistan with him. The young sniper who'd finished what he couldn't. 2 points on a line stretching across generations. You did good, Jack. Tommy's voice was quiet but carried. Sarah's alive. Mission's complete. Volkov's dead. That's about as good as these things get. Morrison's not alive. No. But Morrison knew the risks. Made his choice. Died doing his job. You can't save everyone, Jack. You can only honor the ones you lose by making sure their sacrifice meant something. And did it mean something? Tommy looked at Sarah, at the young woman who'd proven herself in fire and violence, at David Chen's daughter who'd avenged her father and become a warrior in her own right. Yeah, I'd say it meant something. The base hospital was cramped but functional. Jack sat on an exam table while a Navy corpsman treated his burns. 2nd degree on his forearms. 1st degree on his face and neck. Painful but not life-threatening. The kind of wounds that would heal in weeks and leave scars that lasted forever. You're lucky, the corpsman said. Few more seconds in that fire and we'd be treating 3rd-degree burns. Or worse. Lucky. Jack had been called many things in his life. Lucky wasn't usually one of them. But compared to Morrison, compared to the 8 men from Afghanistan, compared to everyone who didn't walk out of burning buildings, maybe lucky was accurate. Sarah was in the next exam room. Jack could hear her arguing with the doctor about whether she needed to stay overnight for observation. Stubborn, like her father. David had once walked 8 clicks on a broken ankle rather than call for a medevac and compromise the mission. Sarah had that same stubborn refusal to acknowledge weakness. She gets that from you. Hawk's voice came from the doorway. That refusal to quit even when her body's telling her to stop. She gets it from her father. Maybe. But she learned to channel it from you. There's a difference between stubborn and disciplined. You taught her discipline. Jack thought about Sarah lowering her rifle instead of shooting Volkov in anger. About her choosing justice over revenge. About her growing from a talented shooter into a complete warrior. She taught herself that. I just showed her the path. That's what teachers do. Hawk pulled up a chair, sat with the weight of command visible in every line of his face. I need to know what happened in that compound. The official version. For the report. Jack recounted the mission in clinical detail. The infiltration, Morrison's breach and subsequent death, the confrontation with Volkov, the revelation about 1989, Sarah's choice, the explosion, the extraction. When he finished, Hawk sat silent for a long moment, processing, calculating, determining what would go in official reports and what would remain between warriors. Volkov admitted to setting you up, to deliberately engineering the ambush that killed your team. Yes, that changes everything. You've been carrying guilt for 30 years based on enemy action, not your failure. Doesn't bring them back. No, but it means you can stop punishing yourself. Stop living half a life. Stop being a ghost. Hawk's voice was firm. Jack, you're free, truly free. For the first time since 1989, you have no debt to the dead. They died because of enemy action, not your mistake. You can let them go. Jack wanted to believe that, wanted to feel the liberation Hawk described, but 30 years of guilt had carved grooves in his psyche deeper than logic could fill. Knowing the truth intellectually was different from feeling it emotionally. That would take time, maybe more time than he had left. I'll work on it. You better, because you've still got work to do. Training, teaching, building the next generation of shooters. Can't do that if you're trapped in the past. Is that an order? That's a request from a friend who's watched you suffer long enough. Let it go, Jack. Move forward. Live. The words echoed Elizabeth's from his dream. Tommy's from their porch conversation. Sarah's from a dozen interactions. Everyone in his life trying to give him permission to stop suffering. Maybe it was time to accept that permission. Maybe it was time to choose life over penance. I'll try. That's all anyone can ask. The memorial service for Jake Morrison was held 3 days later. The entire base attended. Young operators who trained with him, support staff who'd known him casually, and the 3 people who'd watched him die. Jack, Sarah, and Reeves stood together in dress uniforms, bearing witness to a life cut short by violence and duty. Hawk delivered the eulogy, spoke of Morrison's skill, his dedication, his sacrifice. Spoke of a young man who'd volunteered for a dangerous mission knowing the risks. Spoke of heroism in concrete terms rather than abstract platitudes. It was a good speech, honest, real. But words meant little against the weight of Morrison's parents in the front row. His mother crying quietly. His father stone-faced in the way of men who refused to break in public. His sister, barely 20, looking lost and small in her black dress. After the service, Jack approached Morrison's father, stood before a man who'd lost his son, and searched for words that wouldn't sound hollow. "Mr. Morrison, I'm Jack McCallister. I was Jake's team leader on his final mission." Morrison Sr. looked at Jack with eyes that held no forgiveness. "My son died following your orders." "Yes, sir, he did." "Was it worth it? Did his death accomplish something? Or did he die for nothing in some godforsaken compound nobody will remember?" The questions were brutal, fair, deserved. Jack didn't flinch from them. "Your son died completing a mission that eliminated a terrorist who'd killed dozens of Americans over 30 years. He died protecting his teammates. He died doing exactly what he trained to do. Whether that's worth a life, I can't answer. But I can tell you he died as a warrior, with courage, with honor, making sure others would live." Morrison's father stared at Jack for long seconds, then nodded once. Short, sharp, acknowledgement without acceptance. "Thank you for bringing him home. That's something." It was all Jack could offer, all any commander could offer families who sent their children to war and received folded flags in return. It never felt like enough, never would. Sarah watched the exchange from a distance. When Jack rejoined her, her eyes were wet. "That never gets easier, does it?" "No. Every death takes something from you, every notification to a family, every memorial service. It accumulates." "How do you keep doing it? Keep sending people into danger knowing some won't come back?" "Because the alternative is worse. We don't fight because we love violence. We fight to protect people who can't protect themselves. Your father understood that. Morrison understood that. Every warrior who's ever put on a uniform understood that." Jack paused. "The question isn't whether it's worth it. The question is whether we're willing to pay the price." Morrison was. "That's what we honor." Sarah nodded slowly, processing, adding Morrison to her own list of names she'd carry. The cost of leadership was measured in weight that never decreased, only grew heavier. That evening, Jack found himself at the shooting range, alone. The base quiet in that way only military installations achieved after duty hours. He carried his Chaytak M200, the rifle that had defined 40 years, the tool that had saved lives and taken them, the extension of his will across impossible distances. He set up at the 1,000-meter line, targets barely visible in fading light, loaded a magazine, chambered a round, settled into prone position with the muscle memory of 10,000 repetitions. Through the scope, the world shrank to a circle of magnified reality. The target stood clear, wind minimal, temperature dropping, but still manageable. Every variable favorable. Jack's finger touched the trigger. 2 pounds of pressure, then 3. 1 more pound would break the shot. And for the first time in 30 years, his hands were steady. No tremor, no hesitation, no flashback to Afghanistan. Just calm competence born from decades of practice. He fired. The rifle roared. The bullet flew. 1.3 seconds later, the target showed impact. Center mass. Perfect. Jack cycled the bolt. Fired again. Another hit. And again. And again. 12 rounds. 12 hits. The rhythm and meditation he'd lost after the battle had returned. The confidence trauma had stolen had been restored. He was whole again. Not the warrior he'd been at 32. That man was gone forever. But something better. Something tempered by loss and failure and hard-won wisdom. Something that understood limitations but refused to be defined by them. "You're shooting again." Sarah's voice came from behind. Jack hadn't heard her approach. Sign of either her skill or his focus. Probably both. Needed to know if I still could, without freezing, without the ghosts interfering. And I can. The hands work. The training holds. I'm not broken, just bent. There's a difference. Sarah sat beside him, pulled her own rifle from its case, MK-13 that she'd carried through the battle and the mission. Set up parallel to Jack, 2 shooters side by side, teacher and student, past and future. "Show me the 6,000-meter setup again." "I want to try for 7,000. Jack smiled, always pushing, always reaching for the next impossible distance. That was how progress happened. Each generation standing on the shoulders of the previous, reaching higher. They worked through the evening, calculating, adjusting, testing equipment limits and human capabilities. The conversation was technical, but the subtext was healing. Two people connected by loss and purpose, finding peace in shared work. As night fell and the targets became invisible, they packed their gear in comfortable silence. Sarah spoke first. Master Chief, what are you going to do now? With Volkov gone, the mission complete, what comes next? Jack thought about the question, about retirement that had felt like surrender, about guilt that had defined 3 decades, about a future suddenly open to possibilities he'd stopped imagining. I'm going to keep teaching, going to build the program Hawk wants, going to make sure the next generation is better than mine was. That's legacy, that's purpose. And the ghosts, I'm going to let them rest, stop carrying them like burdens, start honoring them by living well, by being fully present instead of half dead. Jack looked at Sarah, your father, the others. They didn't die so I could spend 30 years suffering. They died so the mission would continue, so others would be protected. Best way to honor them is to continue that work. Sarah smiled. He would approve, my father. He always said the mark of a good leader was knowing when to step back and let others lead. Is that what you think I should do? Step back? Eventually, but not yet. We've still got work to do, students to train, impossible shots to make possible. Sarah paused. Besides, I'm not ready to lose my teacher. You don't need me anymore. You proved that in the compound. You made the shots I couldn't make. Showed discipline I'd lost. You're ready. Maybe for some things, but there's a difference between ready and complete. I want to learn everything you know. Every technique, every calculation, every hard lesson from 40 years of experience. That takes time. Jack felt warmth in his chest, pride mixed with purpose. She was right. Training never truly ended. There was always more to learn, more to pass on, more to build. All right, we keep working, but on one condition. Name it. You start training others too, teaching what I've taught you, creating your own students. The chain has to continue beyond just us. Sarah extended her hand. Deal. They shook. 2 warriors making a pact, committing to a future built on shared purpose and legacy. It wasn't peace, but it was something better. It was meaning. 2 weeks later, Jack stood before a new class of aspiring snipers. 8 people, 6 men, 2 women, just ranging from 23 to 40. All volunteers, all qualified, all eager to learn from the legendary Longshot McCallister. Sarah stood beside him, not as student anymore, but as co-instructor, equal partner in the program they were building. She'd earned that position through skill and courage, and the kind of character that couldn't be taught, but had to be forged in fire. Jack looked at the faces before him. Young, determined, naive in the way all warriors were naive before combat taught them otherwise. They thought training would make them invincible. Reality would teach them different. But that was tomorrow's lesson. Today's lesson was simpler. Before we start, I need to tell you about some people. Jack pulled out his worn data book, the leather journal containing 40 years of shots and stories. David Chen, Tommy Martinez, 8 others whose names you'll never know, but whose sacrifice made it possible for you to stand here. And most recently, Jake Morrison, who died 2 weeks ago completing a mission. He opened the book to the page where Morrison's name was now written. Last entry, newest ghost. These people are why we do what we do. Not for glory, not for recognition, but to protect those who can't protect themselves. To stand between innocence and violence. To ensure that evil men don't operate without consequence. He looked up. If you're here for any other reason, leave now. This job will break you. Will cost you pieces of yourself you didn't know could be lost. The only thing that makes it bearable is knowing your sacrifice serves something larger than yourself. No one moved. Jack hadn't expected them to. People didn't volunteer for sniper training without understanding the weight. But saying it aloud, making it explicit, that was part of the initiation. The acknowledgement that they were choosing a path that might end in body bags and memorial services. Sarah stepped forward. Master Chief McCallister is going to teach you how to shoot at distances you think are impossible. How to make calculations under stress that would challenge computers. How to become tools of precision violence. I'm going to teach you how to live with what that means. How to carry the weight without breaking. How to honor the dead by living with purpose. The students absorbed this, processing, realizing they'd signed up for something more complex than point and shoot. Something that required not just physical skill, but moral clarity, emotional resilience, spiritual strength. Jack and Sarah spend the next 6 hours on fundamentals. wind reading, range estimation, ballistic calculations, the building blocks that transform shooters into snipers. The students were eager but sloppy, had to unlearn bad habits acquired in basic training, had to understand that precision shooting was equal parts mathematics and meditation. By afternoon, they were exhausted. Jack dismissed them with homework. Study ballistic coefficients, memorize atmospheric effects on bullet flight, practice mental math until the calculations became automatic. After the students left, Sarah and Jack remained at the range, watching sunset paint mountains in shades of amber and crimson. The ritual they developed over 2 weeks, the daily affirmation that they were alive and capable and committed to something meaningful. They're raw, Sarah said. Going to take months to bring them up to standard. That's fine. We got time, and they've got potential. Jack smiled. That one kid, the tall one from Texas, he's got natural wind reading ability. Rare gift. And the woman from California? She's got the kind of focus you can't teach, born with it. They discussed each student, identifying strengths and weaknesses, designing individualized training plans. The work was detailed and demanding, exactly what Jack needed, purpose that filled days and pushed ghosts to the periphery. A vehicle approached. Tommy Martinez driving a Jeep loaded with medical supplies. The old medic waved, parked, walked over with the slight limp that 40 years of combat had earned him. Heard you started teaching again. Good for you. Someone has to train these kids before they get themselves killed. Tommy laughed. Same Jack, always worrying about everyone else. He pulled 3 beers from a cooler in the Jeep. Thought we could raise a glass to Morrison and to the others. Been meaning to do it properly. They sat on sandbags, 3 survivors of that day in 1989 when the world exploded. 3 people who'd carried 30 years of weight together, who'd supported each other through darkness that would have broken most people, who'd found a way to keep living when dying would have been easier. Tommy opened the beers, handed them out, raised his bottle to Jake Morrison, to David Chen, to the 8 others whose names we carry. May they rest knowing their sacrifice mattered. They drank. Beer warm from sitting in the Jeep. Didn't matter. The ritual was what counted. The acknowledgement, the remembrance, the refusal to let the dead be forgotten. You know what David told me once? Tommy's voice was contemplative. He said the goal wasn't to live forever. It was to create something that would. Legacy, impact, ripples that continued after you were gone. Sarah spoke quietly. Is that what we're doing? Creating ripples? That's exactly what we're doing. Jack looked at her. You're going to train dozens of snipers. They'll train dozens more. Within 20 years, there'll be hundreds of people using techniques we developed, making shots we pioneered, protecting lives because we taught them how. That's legacy. That's immortality. And the ones who died, what's their legacy? Tommy answered, their legacy is you, Sarah Chen, daughter of David Chen, alive because your father threw himself on a grenade, metaphorically speaking. Warrior because Jack taught you. Teacher because you're going to pass it on. David's legacy isn't his death, it's your life. Sarah cried quietly, not from sadness but from release, from understanding, from accepting that her father's sacrifice had meaning because she gave it meaning, because she chose to honor him through action rather than mourning. They sat until stars emerged, 3 people bound by loss and purpose, 3 points on a line stretching across generations. Past, present, future, all connected by the simple choice to keep going, to keep fighting, to keep teaching, to ensure that sacrifice serves something larger than individual lives. Finally, Tommy stood, stretched, groaned as old injuries protested. I'm getting too old for sitting on sandbags. You're getting too old for everything, Jack said. Should probably retire, says the man who retired 18 months ago and is already back teaching full-time. That's different. How? Because I'm not as old as you. They laughed, the kind of laughter that came from decades of friendship, from shared trauma and shared survival, from the understanding that humor was often the only weapon against darkness. Tommy left. Sarah and Jack remained. The stars wheeled overhead in their eternal dance. The mountains stood silent, and 2 warriors found peace in the simple act of existing, of being present, of choosing life. The next 3 months passed in a rhythm Jack had forgotten existed. Wake at 0000, PT at 030, breakfast at 030, teaching from 0800 to 1700, personal training from 1700 to 1900, dinner, planning, sleep, repeat. The structure was comforting, the purpose fulfilling, and most importantly, the ghosts were quiet, not gone. Jack suspected they never would be truly gone, but quiet, manageable, companions rather than tormentors. His students progressed rapidly. The tall Texan, whose name was Marcus Webb, made his first 1,000-meter shot in week 3. The focused Californian, Angela Rivera, successfully engaged a moving target at 1,500 meters in week 7. By week 12, all 8 students were competent at ranges that would have been considered impossible a generation earlier. Sarah taught alongside Jack, brought fresh perspectives, techniques he'd never considered, ways of explaining concepts that reached students differently. She was becoming not just a skilled operator, but a skilled teacher. The transformation was beautiful to watch. One afternoon in late spring, Hawk called them both to his office. His expression was serious, but not grim. The look of someone about to deliver news that would change circumstances. I've been authorized to formalize your program, Task Force Precision, dedicated unit for extreme range sniping. Jack, you're offered the position of commander. Sarah, you're offered executive officer. Comes with promotions, budget, authority to recruit and train. Jack looked at Sarah, saw excitement mixed with uncertainty. This was the opportunity they'd been building toward. Official recognition, resources, impact at scale. What's the catch? Jack asked. No catch. You've proven the concept. Multiple successful missions. Students performing beyond expectations. Command wants to expand, make it permanent. And if we decline, then the program continues as is, but without official backing, without resources, without the ability to grow. Hawk leaned forward. Jack, Sarah, you've built something remarkable. Don't let it die because of bureaucracy or fear of commitment. Take the offer, make it real. Jack thought about what acceptance meant. Permanent position, years of service, commitment to a future he'd stopped at imagining. But also impact, legacy, the ability to train hundreds instead of dozens. He looked at Sarah. Your call as much as mine. Sarah smiled. I'm in if you are. Jack extended his hand to Hawk. We're in. Hawk shook firmly. Welcome to Task Force Precision. Now let's go change the game. The formal establishment of Task Force Precision was marked with a small ceremony. No speeches, no fanfare, just a flag raising and the reading of orders. Jack stood in dress uniform, feeling simultaneously proud and awkward. Praise had always made him uncomfortable. He preferred the quiet work to the public recognition. But Sarah glowed. At 28, she was one of the youngest executive officers in Special Operations. More importantly, she'd earned the position through skill and courage rather than politics. That mattered. After the ceremony, an older officer approached. 4 stars on his shoulders, Admiral James Blackwood, commander of Naval Special Warfare, the man ultimately responsible for every SEAL on the planet. Master Chief McCallister, I wanted to personally thank you for your service and for what you're building here. Just doing my job, sir. The Admiral smiled. You're doing considerably more than that. You're changing how we think about long-range precision. Creating capabilities that didn't exist before. That's innovation. That's leadership. Credit goes to Lieutenant Chen. She's the shooter making impossible shots. And you're the teacher who taught her. Don't diminish your contribution. The Admiral paused. I knew David Chen. Served with him in the late 80s. Good man, good SEAL. He'd be proud of what his daughter's become. Jack felt emotion catch in his throat. Thank you, sir. That means a great deal. The Admiral moved on, shook Sarah's hand, offered congratulations, then departed in the way senior officers did, appearing briefly, making impact, vanishing before anyone could get comfortable. Sarah joined Jack. That was unexpected. The Admiral doesn't attend ceremonies unless something's important. This is important. They stood together, watching the flag of Task Force Precision snap in the wind. Black and gold, the colors of precision and excellence, the banner under which they'd build something lasting. You know what this means, right? Sarah's voice was soft. We're committed now. Years of service, training hundreds of students, building a legacy. That was always the plan. I know, but it's different when it's official. When you can't just walk away. When you're responsible for something bigger than yourself. Jack looked at the mountains, at the ranges where they'd trained, at the base that had become home, at the future stretching ahead like an open road. I stopped being able to walk away 30 years ago. When David and the others died, when I realized my life wasn't mine anymore, but belonged to the mission they couldn't complete. He looked at Sarah. This isn't burden, it's privilege. We get to make sure their sacrifice continues to matter, that their death served a purpose beyond just names on a wall. Sarah nodded. Let's build something worthy of them. That night, Jack returned to his cabin one final time. He'd be moving on base permanently, closer to the work, closer to the students, closer to the future. The cabin had served its purpose, provided shelter during years of isolation. But that chapter was closed. He stood before the mantle, the photographs that had defined so much of his life. Elizabeth smiling in her wedding dress. James frozen forever in marine blues. Michael deployed somewhere far away. And the group photo from Afghanistan. 10 men, 8 red circles. Jack pulled down the photograph of the 10 men, studied the faces one final time. David Chen, Tommy Martinez, 8 others. Young, confident, doomed. He'd carried them for 30 years. Had let their ghost define him. Had forgotten that the best way to honor the dead was to live fully. He removed the red circles, carefully, deliberately, erasing the marks that had turned living men into tragic symbols. They were more than their deaths, were fathers, friends, warriors, deserved to be remembered as complete people rather than just casualties. In their place, he wrote dates, birth and death, life summarized in years but meaning so much more. David Chen, 1954 to 1989. Then the others, each name, each span of years, each life reduced to numbers but remembered in full. On the back of the photograph, Jack wrote a final entry, his own words, his own summary of what 30 years had taught him. They died doing what they believed in, protecting others, making a difference, living according to their values. Their sacrifice was not in vain because I have spent 30 years ensuring it mattered. I have taught others, built programs, created capabilities, honored their memory by living with purpose. This is my promise kept. This is my debt paid. This is my freedom earned. He signed it, dated it, then placed the photograph in a box along with his data book, his records, his history, not discarded but archived, preserved but no longer defining. Jack McCallister was no longer a ghost, was no longer defined by failure or guilt or the weight of carrying the dead, was instead a teacher, a leader, a warrior who'd learned that legacy wasn't about individual heroics, but about building something that outlasted individual lives. He locked the cabin, drove to base, moved into his new quarters, unpacked with the efficiency of someone who'd done this 100 times in 100 different places. And when he was settled, when his few possessions found their places, he sat at his new desk and began planning curriculum for the next class. 15 students this time, then 20, then 30. Each class building on the previous. Each student carrying forward techniques and knowledge. Each generation pushing boundaries further than the last. That was legacy. That was victory. That was purpose. The mountain stood eternal outside his window, indifferent to human struggles. But the humans who struggled in their shadows were not indifferent, cared deeply, fought hard, built lasting things from temporary lives. And in a small office on a military base in the Colorado Rockies, a 62-year-old man who'd spent 30 years carrying ghosts finally allowed himself to believe in tomorrow, in purpose beyond penance, in life beyond survival. 6 months later, Task Force Precision graduated its 3rd class. 24 students now qualified for extreme range operations, deployed to units worldwide, making shots that saved lives, protecting innocence, stopping threats, continuing the mission. Jack stood at the graduation ceremony, watched as Sarah pinned badges on young warriors, saw pride in their faces, saw determination, saw the next generation ready to carry the torch forward. The Admiral returned for the ceremony, delivered brief remarks about innovation and excellence, then surprised everyone by announcing a new award, the David Chen Memorial Trophy, presented annually to the Task Force Precision student who best exemplified skill, leadership, and character. The first recipient there was Angela Rivera, the focused Californian who'd proven herself exceptional in every metric. She accepted the trophy with tears in her eyes, understanding the weight of the name she now honored. Jack watched from the side, saw Sarah's face as her father's name was spoken with respect and recognition, saw her realize that David Chen's legacy was now permanently embedded in the program, that future generations would ask who David Chen was and be told, a warrior, a teacher, a hero, and students would strive to match his example. After the ceremony, Sarah found Jack. They walked to the range, their customary ritual, the place where teaching happened and bonds were forged. My father would have loved this, seeing his name honored, seeing what we've built. He knows. Wherever he is, he knows. They stood in comfortable silence. Two warriors who'd found purpose in shared work, who'd built something lasting from loss, who'd proven that the best way to honor the dead was to live with purpose. You know what I realize? Sarah's voice was thoughtful. We're not just teaching shooting, we're teaching how to carry the weight, how to live with what we do, how to find meaning in violence. That's always been the real lesson. The shooting is just mechanics. Living with it is the art. And you've taught me that art. Taught me how to honor my father by being more than just his daughter, by being a warrior in my own right. Jack felt pride swell in his chest. You were always going to be a warrior. I just helped you understand what that meant. They returned to base as sunset painted the sky in shades of fire and gold. The day ending, the work continuing, the mission stretching forward into a future neither could predict, but both were committed to shaping. In his quarters that night, Jack wrote a letter, not to anyone living, but to David Chen, a letter 30 years overdue. David, I'm writing to tell you that I finally understand. You didn't die because I failed. You died doing what you believed in, protecting your team, protecting your daughter, protecting the future. And that sacrifice has echoed across 30 years, has shaped lives, has created warriors who carry your example forward. Sarah is everything you hoped she'd be. Strong, skilled, principled. She honors your memory every day by living with purpose. And I've finally learned to honor you by living fully, by teaching, by building, by ensuring your death meant something. Thank you for your service. Thank you for your friendship. Thank you for teaching me that legacy isn't about living forever. It's about creating something that does. Rest well, brother. The mission continues. He sealed the letter, placed it in a box with the photograph. Archive completed. Past honored. Future embraced. Jack McCallister, 62 years old, 4 decades of service, 30 years of guilt, finally released, lay down to sleep. And for the first time since 1989, he dreamed not of death and failure, but of life and possibility. The ghosts were quiet, not gone, never gone, but quiet, resting at peace. And in that peace, Jack found something he'd stopped believing existed. Hope. Not hope for personal salvation, but hope that his work mattered, that his students would continue the mission, that the chains stretching across generations would remain unbroken. That was enough. That was everything. Morning came with sunrise over mountains. Jack woke at 0500, same as always, but different, lighter, unburdened, free. He dressed, made coffee, reviewed lesson plans for the day, and when Sarah knocked on his door at 0600, ready for the morning run they'd made routine, he greeted her with genuine smile. Ready to change the world, Lieutenant? Every day, Master Chief, every day. They ran through dawn light, two warriors committed to a mission larger than themselves, two people who'd learned that the hardest battles weren't fought against enemies, but against the demons inside. Two survivors who'd proven that broken things could still serve purpose, could still build, could still matter. Behind them, Task Force Precision woke to another day, students preparing for training, instructors reviewing curriculum. The machinery of purpose and legacy grinding forward, creating warriors who would protect innocence and stop threats and honor those who came before by carrying the torch forward. And in the mountains that had witnessed so much violence and sacrifice and determination, 2 more days of life were added to the eternal accounting, 2 more chances to make a difference, 2 more opportunities to prove that meaning could be carved from chaos and purpose could be found in the darkest valleys. Jack McCallister had spent 40 years learning one simple truth. Legacy wasn't about what you accomplished for yourself. It was about what you enabled others to accomplish, about the ripples spreading outward from single lives, about the chain connecting past, present, and future into something coherent and meaningful. He'd been a shooter, a warrior, a ghost, and now, finally, he was a teacher, the most important role of all, the one that ensured the mission continued long after individual soldiers fell. That was victory. That was peace. That was enough. The mountains stood eternal. The mission continued. And an old warrior finally understood that his war was over, not because he died, but because he'd learned to truly live. The torch had been passed, the next generation was ready, and the chain, forged in blood and sacrifice and stubborn determination across decades, remained unbroken. That was legacy. That was honor. That was the final victory of Jack McCallister and all those who'd fought beside him. The story ended not with death, but with life. Not with failure, but with purpose. Not with ghosts, but with warriors walking confidently into dawn. And in the quiet morning light of the Colorado Rockies, that was exactly as it should be.